Welcome back, dear listener. Find a comfortable position now. Let your body settle into whatever surface holds you. Feel the weight of the day beginning to lift, slowly, like mist rising from a still lake just before the sun disappears below the horizon. Tonight we travel somewhere close and yet impossibly far. We travel inward, to the place where your mind goes each night when consciousness loosens its grip and something ancient and vast takes over. That place between waking and dreaming. Between what is real and what is more real than real. Tonight's story begins with a woman named Mara, a woman who spent her whole life chasing sleep and never quite catching it. A woman who, on one ordinary autumn evening, finally discovered why. Because as it turns out, you have never been alone in your dreams. There have always been collectors. And tonight, we're going to find out why they come. Breathe in slowly now, and out. Settle deeper. This story is yours to carry into sleep. We want to thank you for supporting us. We're almost at 50 subs, and it would mean so much if you could support the channel by leaving a like and subscribing to help keep this channel going. Anyways, back to the video. Mara Voss had not slept properly in 11 years. This was not an exaggeration. Not the kind of casual complaint people make when they stay up too late scrolling through their phones and then feel groggy in the morning. This was a genuine, documented, medically acknowledged condition that had followed her from her mid-30s, like a faithful and unwelcome companion, sitting beside her in the dark every single night, refusing to leave. She had tried everything. She had the kind of medicine cabinet that other people raised eyebrows at when they opened it by mistake looking for aspirin. There were melatonin gummies in 3 different strengths. There was valerian root. There was a prescription she never quite felt comfortable taking, tucked behind a box of chamomile tea she no longer believed in. There were earplugs, a white noise machine, a weighted blanket that cost more than her first month's rent when she was 22, and a set of blackout curtains so effective that when she pulled them closed at night, the room became a kind of velvet darkness so complete it almost had texture. None of it worked. Not reliably, not the way sleep was supposed to work, which was quietly, naturally, without effort. Mara was a sleep researcher. The irony was not lost on her. She worked at a small university laboratory on the outskirts of a rainy Pacific Northwest city, studying the neurological patterns of dreaming in her subjects, while her own dream life remained stubbornly, frustratingly sparse. She could read a polysomnography chart the way musicians read sheet music, could identify REM cycles and sleep spindles and hypnagogic jerks with a glance, could explain the architecture of a good night's sleep to anyone who asked with clear and genuine expertise. And then she would go home, and she would lie in the dark, and she would wait. Most nights, sleep eventually came for her somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning. A thin, unsatisfying sleep, like broth instead of soup. She would wake at 6 feeling as though she had only closed her eyes for a moment, which in some meaningful sense was exactly what had happened. Her colleagues were sympathetic. Her friends, the few she had kept through the years of declining dinner invitations because she was too tired, were sympathetic too. Her therapist, whom she saw on Thursdays, offered cognitive behavioural techniques for insomnia that Mara could have recited herself in her sleep, if she could sleep. She was not a sad person, precisely. She was more like a person running on a slightly lower voltage than everyone else around her. Present, functional, competent, even occasionally funny. But always with that background hum of exhaustion, that faint and constant awareness of what she was missing. It was late October when everything changed. The city outside her apartment building had gone the particular shade of amber and red and brown that Pacific Northwest autumns specialise in. A slow and generous display of dying that somehow manages to be the most beautiful thing the trees do all year. Mara noticed it on her walk home from the lab that Thursday evening, stopping on the wet sidewalk for a moment to tilt her head back and look up through the canopy of a maple tree at the sky beyond, which was a deep and darkening blue going purple at the edges. She noticed the colour of it. That was unusual. Most evenings she walked home mostly inside her own head, cataloguing the things that hadn't gotten done and the things that needed to happen tomorrow, constructing the careful mental architecture of a person who has learned to compensate for cognitive fatigue with meticulous planning. But this evening, something made her stop. Something made her look up. There was something in the quality of the light, she thought. Something different about the air. She stood there for almost a full minute, which felt to her like a long time. And then she walked the rest of the way home, feeling something she couldn't quite name. Not peace, exactly. More like the sense of standing just outside a door that was about to open. Her apartment was small and carefully organised. She had the kind of space that reflected a particular kind of interior life. Everything in its place, not out of compulsion, but out of genuine preference for order, a recognition that when the external world was calm, the internal world had slightly less to contend with. Plants on the windowsills, books spine out on the shelves, some of them faced inward if she had read them and not loved them. A reading chair with good light, a kitchen that smelled faintly of whatever she had cooked last, which tonight was nothing because she'd not been hungry. She made tea instead, chamomile, despite her scepticism, old habits. She took her tea to the reading chair and opened a book she'd been trying to finish for 3 months, a novel about a lighthouse keeper on an island off the coast of Scotland who begins to hear voices in the fog. She read 4 pages before her eyes started to drift and she stopped fighting it and closed them. This was how sleep sometimes came for Mara. Not in the bed, not after the careful ritual of brushing teeth and setting alarms and lying down in the correct position and breathing deliberately. Sleep came sideways, in chairs, when she wasn't trying. She let herself go, and something completely different happened. It began the way sleep usually begins, with the hypnagogic slide, that loosening of the grip, the images behind the eyes becoming more vivid and less controlled, the sense of the self gently releasing its tight hold on the narrative thread of consciousness. She recognised all of this. It was her professional territory. She knew the map. But then she crossed the border into somewhere she had never been. The quality of the darkness behind her closed eyes changed. It went from the ordinary darkness of a person falling asleep to something with depth, with dimension, with a kind of luminous quality she had no clinical term for. It was dark the way deep water is dark. You know that light exists somewhere above. But where you are, it is different. Older. Quieter. And then she saw them. Not clearly, not in the sharp-edged way of waking vision. More the way you perceive something in peripheral vision at night, where the rods in your eyes catch what the cones miss, where looking directly at a thing makes it disappear, and looking away from it lets it become visible. Shapes, moving with extraordinary care and deliberateness, the way surgeons move, or the way people move in rooms where others are sleeping. Careful, intentional, reverent almost. They were moving through the space around her, and they were collecting something. Mara, who had spent 11 years studying what happens to the human mind during sleep, and who in all of that time had never once had a visitation she could not explain neurologically, felt no fear. She felt instead the strangest sensation of recognition, as though she had always known they were there, and had simply, until this moment, been too close to the surface to see them. She did not wake up. She went deeper, and the story that unfolded over the next several hours was the most important thing she had ever learned. It was more important than her dissertation, more important than the 3 papers she had published in peer-reviewed journals about the function of REM sleep in emotional memory consolidation. More important than anything her 11 years of research had taught her, because it answered the question she'd never quite known how to ask. Why do we dream? Not in the functional, neurological sense. Not the processing of memories, not the rehearsal of threat responses, not the consolidation of learning. Those answers were true as far as they went, but they did not go far enough. Mara Voss, sleep researcher, chronic insomniac, woman who had spent half her adult life studying a phenomenon she could not herself fully experience, was about to learn why the universe itself has a stake in human dreaming. And the answer, when it came, was vast and quiet and old as starlight. She breathed slowly in her reading chair by the window, where the chamomile tea had gone cold, and the maple tree outside dropped one more leaf in the amber October dark, and the shapes moved carefully around her, and they collected. It is important to understand something about the space Mara entered that night. It was not quite sleep in the ordinary sense, though it shared sleep's geography. It was more like standing at the edge of sleep where the mind is loose enough to perceive what waking rigidity conceals, but conscious enough to remember and understand. Researchers sometimes call this the hypnagogic state, and Mara knew it well in theory. In practice, experiencing it this fully, this completely, this lucidly, was entirely new. The shapes she perceived around her were not threatening. That was the first and most important thing, and it was not a conclusion she reached through careful reasoning, but a direct knowledge that arrived the way you know, upon walking into a room, whether the people in it mean you well. The body knows before the mind can articulate. The nervous system reads the room. These shapes meant her no harm. They were focused on something else entirely. As her awareness deepened and her perception sharpened in that strange, sideways, peripheral manner, she began to understand what they were doing with greater clarity. They moved through the sleeping world, through the space where dreaming minds generated their strange and private imagery, and they gathered from it with extraordinary care, the way a careful beekeeper works a hive, disturbing as little as possible, taking only what is offered by the natural process of the thing. And what they were gathering was not memory. It was not information in any sense Mara had a clinical framework for. It was something closer to feeling made form. Dreams, she began to understand, are not simply the brain's clean-up process. They are not merely the mind sorting through the day's inputs, filing and discarding. They are something more fundamental, something that has to do with the human capacity for a particular kind of experience that exists nowhere else in the known universe. The capacity to feel the impossible. In dreams, you can feel what it is to fly over a city at dusk, the cool air streaming past, the lights below like scattered stars, the specific quality of that freedom which has no waking equivalent. In dreams, you can feel the grief of losing someone who has not yet died, the relief of being forgiven for something you have not done, the joy of an encounter with beauty so complete it verges on pain. You can feel love for people who do not exist, in places that have never been built, in situations that defy every physical law. Dreams are the place where the human heart practices experiences that have no other stage, and it turned out that this was, from a certain perspective, the most valuable thing on Earth. One of the shapes moved closer to Mara, and she understood, without language, that it was aware of her awareness, that her being present here, conscious in this way, was unusual, and that this particular being had decided to meet her at the level of understanding rather than leaving her to observe without context. What she received then was not words. It was not telepathy in the science fiction sense. It was more like the sudden comprehension you get when you've been looking at a pattern, and then, in one moment, the whole thing resolves into meaning, a gestalt recognition, the feeling of finally seeing what was always there. She understood that these beings had been coming to Earth for a very long time, not centuries, longer. They had been drawn to this particular planet, this ordinary-sized world orbiting an ordinary-sized star in one of the quieter spirals of one galaxy, among hundreds of billions, for a reason that was specific and extraordinary. Earth was, it appeared, one of the only places in the observed universe where biological creatures had developed the capacity for what these beings thought of, in whatever conceptual language their minds used, as generative emotional imagination. The ability not merely to feel, but to feel entirely new things, to dream up emotions that did not previously exist, to generate, from the raw materials of experience and consciousness, experiences that the universe had never contained before. Most sentient life, it turned out, was capable of sophisticated cognition, of communication, of social organization, of problem-solving that put human beings to shame in certain respects. But very few species anywhere had developed the capacity for dreaming in the way humans dream, for manufacturing in the sleeping mind entirely original emotional experiences, for creating, from nothing, feelings that had never existed before in the universe. This was, from a cosmological perspective, essentially magic. And these beings were, in the most precise and respectful way, collectors of magic. Mara absorbed all of this the way you absorb music in a dark room, not analysing, just receiving. Her scientific mind did not argue with it. Her scientific mind, she realised later, recognised the quality of what she was receiving, the way a good theory feels when you encounter it. That sense of things clicking into alignment, of a pattern becoming legible. The one nearest her communicated something else, something more specific, a kind of apology or an acknowledgement. It said, in the way that it said things, that she was unusual, that most humans move through the dreaming state without ever becoming aware of the collectors. That her particular neurology, the very thing that made her sleep so difficult and so light, the restlessness that kept her near the surface when other minds sank deep, had for 11 years been placing her at exactly the threshold where perception was possible without quite tipping her over into it. It said that tonight was different because she had stopped. On the sidewalk, beneath the maple tree, she had stopped and looked up. And that act of genuine, unforced attention, that moment of choosing to be present to beauty without any agenda, without any reason, had shifted something subtle in her neurological state that had been enough. That was all it had taken. One moment of looking up. The being near her communicated something that Mara later translated to herself as warmth, though that was an inadequate word for it. Something that was not exactly love, but was made of similar material. A recognition of her. Not as a researcher, not as an insomniac, not as a woman of a certain age in a reading chair in a small Pacific Northwest apartment, but as a dreaming mind, as a generator of the thing they had travelled incomprehensible distances to be near. And then it showed her something. A dream. Not her dream, but one it was carrying. One it had just collected from somewhere else in the city, from some other sleeping mind, and it held it up for her to perceive the way you might hold up a piece of sea glass to the light. What she experienced in that moment lasted perhaps 4 seconds of clock time. It felt like standing inside a cathedral made of feeling. It was a complete emotional universe, generated by someone she would never meet, containing experiences she had never had, and it was real in a way that waking life sometimes is not. It was real the way the deepest parts of sleep are real when you're inside them, more real than real, realer than the chair beneath her and the cold tea beside her, and the amber tree outside the window. It was someone's dream of coming home, not to a place, to a feeling. The specific, irreducible, impossible to perfectly describe feeling of arriving somewhere you belong, of being received, of the tension of the journey releasing all at once, of being known. This person had dreamed it so fully, so completely, with such involuntary generosity, that the dream had become something that could be held and travelled with. Mara understood, in the remaining hypnagogic half-consciousness of that autumn evening, why the collectors came, why they travelled the distances they travelled, why Earth mattered. Because humans, in their sleeping hours, generated something the universe needed, something it could not make itself, something so rare and so specific to this particular form of consciousness that these careful, patient, centuries-long visitors considered it worthy of any journey. A dreaming human heart is, it appeared, one of the universe's more remarkable phenomena. And every night, in the dark, the collectors came. You may be wondering, dear listener, what happens to the dreams after they are collected? This is the question Mara spent the next several hours of that long October night trying to understand as she moved in and out of that liminal state, sometimes more conscious and sometimes less, the collector nearest her remaining close, continuing to communicate in that wordless, direct, resonant way. Let yourself breathe now, slowly. Let your body continue to settle. The story is not going anywhere. It will be here, carrying you forward as you drift a little deeper. What happens to collected dreams? The simplest answer is this: they are kept. But kept is not quite the right word, in the same way that a library keeps books. It implies something static, something archived and still. What happens to the dreams the collectors gather is not static at all. It is more accurate to say they are woven. The being nearest Mara communicated this to her not through language but through something more direct, a kind of experiential knowing that bypassed description and arrived as understanding. She perceived, in the way she had perceived the dream of coming home, a sense of something vast and intricate, a structure that existed in dimensions she had no visual representation for, something that was not quite a place and not quite a substance, but was organised the way music is organised, with pattern and purpose and an internal coherence that could be felt even without being fully comprehended. Into this structure, the dreams were woven. Each dream was different. Each one added something new, some quality, some emotional frequency, some shade of experience that the structure did not have before. The dream of coming home added something, and the dream of flying over a city at dusk added something different. And the dream of grief for the not yet dead, and the dream of impossible joy, and the dream of being forgiven, each one contributed a thread that changed what the whole thing was. Mara, who had spent years studying sleep in a laboratory, thinking about it in terms of neural oscillations and neurotransmitter activity, and the adaptive functions of REM, found herself crying, not from sadness, from the specific emotion that has no good name in English, the emotion of encountering something so beautiful and so much larger than you expected that your body does not know what else to do with it, except overflow. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater, and the collector near her communicated something that she understood as quiet acknowledgement. Not comfort exactly, though it had warmth in it. More like witness, the way a good friend sits with you when you are moved by something, not trying to mitigate or redirect, just present, just holding the space of the moment with you. She asked, in whatever way she was able to ask in this state, what the structure was for. The answer came in layers, and some of the layers she could understand and some she could not. The way you understand some of a piece of music even when you don't understand all of it. The layer she understood most clearly was this. The universe, it seemed, was in the process of something that had no precise human equivalent, but came closest to learning. Not in the way an individual organism learns, accumulating information and updating behaviour. Something larger, something that happened across vast time frames and distances. A slow, gathering self-comprehension that required input from conscious beings throughout the cosmos. Dreams were part of that input, not the kind of input that could be gathered from observing conscious beings while they were awake. Waking consciousness, Mara understood, was filtered. It was edited. It was shaped by social context and self-awareness, and the constant maintenance of narrative identity. The story the self tells about itself in order to remain coherent. Waking humans were performing a version of themselves, not even consciously most of the time, but performing nonetheless. Sleeping humans were not. In sleep, and especially in dreams, the filtering fell away. The performance ended. What remained was something raw and truer and less organised, less defensible, less certain of itself. And from that undefended truth, feelings arose that had nowhere else to arise. Feelings that the waking self would hesitate to claim, would moderate, would shape into something more socially acceptable. Dreams allowed the full range. The longing that was too embarrassing to admit during daylight, the grief that had no permission to exist in ordinary life, the joy that was too large for the body to contain while awake, the love that had no object, the sadness that had no cause, the peace that had no reason. Dreams held all of it, without judgment, without editing, without the intervention of the self-conscious mind. And this full range, this emotional breadth and depth and honesty, was exactly what the collectors sought, because the structure they were weaving was not complete. It was ongoing. It was, as far as Mara could understand, a project of such magnitude and such long timescale that the concepts of beginning and ending barely applied. But it was moving towards something, growing towards something, and what it grew toward required, specifically, the kind of feeling-made form that human dreaming produced. You're not, in other words, merely sleeping. Every night when you close your eyes and let the day release, you become a contributor to something much larger than yourself. The dream you have on an ordinary Tuesday, the one you won't remember by Wednesday morning, the one where you were in a house that was somehow your childhood home but also a train station, and also a field by a river. The one where someone said something to you that you couldn't quite hear but felt desperately important. The one that left you feeling a specific shade of wistful longing when you woke up and couldn't place where the feeling had come from. That dream was collected. That dream is part of something. That dream, your dream, small and private and already mostly forgotten, is a thread in something vast. Mara breathed slowly in her reading chair, and the collector near her communicated something that she understood, or tried to understand, as gratitude. A genuine and particular gratitude directed at her, and, through her, at every dreaming human, at every mind that had ever, in the vulnerable, undefended dark of sleep, generated from nothing a feeling that had not existed before. She thought about the years she'd spent lamenting her insomnia, the hundreds of nights she had lain awake furious at her own inability to do the simplest thing, the thing every creature did, the thing that should require no skill or effort or training. She had thought of her difficult sleep as a deficit, a failure of her nervous system, a thing that was wrong with her. She understood now that it had also been something else. It had been proximity. Her restless, surface-skimming, difficult sleep had kept her at the threshold for 11 years, had kept her, without her knowledge, at the exact level where perception was possible. Her insomnia was not only what it appeared to be, she was, in some sense, a natural border crosser, and tonight, beneath the maple tree, she had finally looked up at the right moment. The collector communicated something she could not fully pass, something with too many dimensions for her to hold all of it at once, but the part of it she retained was this. She had been found because she found beauty, because she stopped, because she looked up. Attention, it appeared, was not merely a cognitive function, it was a signal, and the universe, it appeared, was listening. Let your breath slow a little more now. Feel the weight of your hands, the weight of your feet. Let the body be heavy and the mind be light, rising gently the way smoke rises from a candle that has just been extinguished, drifting upward in slow spirals. Mara, in her chair, in her apartment, in her city, in her carefully organised small life, was being shown something she had no framework for, and she was doing what the best scientists do, which is not argue with evidence. She let it come. She let herself be shown. The archive, as she thought of it. The vast interwoven structure that the collectors were building from the gathered dreams of every sleeping mind on Earth. She could not see it directly, in the way she could not look directly at the peripheral shapes of the collectors themselves. But she could sense it, the way you sense a mountain even in fog by its presence, by the way everything else orients around it. It was old. That was the first thing she understood, older than she had expected. The collectors had not begun their work when humans developed language, or when they developed agriculture, or when they first organised into cities. They had begun much earlier, when human dreaming first became complex enough to generate the kind of emotional depth they were seeking. That moment had occurred, as far as Mara could understand, somewhere in the long unrecorded prehistory of the species, when the first human mind, sleeping in the dark of some cave or beneath some overhang of rock while the fire burned low, had first dreamed not just images but feelings, not just representations of the world, but new experiences. Not just the replay of the day's events, but the invention of emotional territory that had not previously existed. That night the collectors had noticed. They had been watching Earth for longer than that, she understood. They had been watching the slow development of complex life on this particular world with the kind of patient, interested attention that beings of their nature were capable of, a time-scale patience that made geological time feel hurried. They had seen many planets where life developed. They had seen many planets where intelligence developed. Neither of these things by itself was what they were looking for. What they were looking for was something rarer, a mind that could feel its own dreaming. Most intelligent life that they had encountered could process information, could communicate, could build, could organise. Many of them had what might be called inner lives. But the specific combination of factors that produced human-style dreaming, the imagination, the emotional depth, the capacity for metaphor, the way the human mind synthesized experience into narrative and then dreamed that narrative into something new, this was particular. Earth had produced it. And so the collectors came. They'd come continuously, without interruption, through all the long history of human sleep. Through the dreams of ancient people who had no word for what they were experiencing, through the dreams of medieval peasants and Egyptian scribes and nomadic people sleeping on open plains under unfamiliar stars. Through the dreams of every generation, in every place, speaking every language, living every kind of life. The archive had grown accordingly. It contained, as far as Mara could understand, the emotional history of humanity, not the events, not the facts, not the dates and names and places that human record-keeping tried to preserve. The feeling history, the inner experience, the thing that history books cannot capture. The quality of a particular kind of grief in a particular century, the specific texture of hope when hope was new and harder to sustain. The shade of wonder that people felt when they first looked through telescopes and understood for the first time how large the universe was. All of it was there, and it was still growing. Tonight, in this city, in this neighbourhood, in this building, the collectors were gathering from the sleeping people all around her. She could sense this, in her liminal state, a kind of awareness of the density of dreaming in her vicinity. The retired schoolteacher on the third floor who was dreaming, richly and elaborately, about a beach she had loved as a child. The young couple in the apartment above hers who were sleeping tangled together, their dreams touching at the edges, each somehow coloured by the other's presence. The night shift worker who lived down the hall and slept during the day and was now, in the hours when the rest of the building was quiet, in the deepest sleep of his day, dreaming something she could not quite make out but which had the quality of great physical freedom, of running, of air. From all of them the collectors gathered, with care, with reverence, taking nothing that the dreaming mind had not already released. It was not extraction, she understood. It was more like witness followed by preservation. The dreams were already there, already generated, already rising from the sleeping mind the way fragrance rises from a flower. The collectors simply received what was freely given, and then they carried it back to wherever they came from, which Mara could not locate in the geography she knew. Not a planet exactly, or not only a planet. More like a between place, a threshold location that existed at the intersection of several kinds of space that she did not have the physics vocabulary to properly think about. A place that was defined not by coordinates, but by its function, the way a library is defined not by the building, but by the act of keeping. This was where the archive lived, and this was where the dream threads, the feeling histories of the human sleeping world, were woven into something that was still, after all these millennia, not finished. Mara asked again in her sideways dream language what would happen when it was. The collector nearest her communicated something she spent a long time afterward trying to articulate. The closest she came was this. When the archive was complete, it would be shown. Not published, not transmitted, not broadcast. Something more fundamental than any of those actions. It would be shown in the way that a proof is shown in mathematics, in the way that evidence is shown in a well-constructed argument. It would demonstrate something about what consciousness is capable of, about what feeling-made form means at a cosmological scale, about why, in a universe that is largely cold and dark and moving away from itself in all directions at accelerating speed, the universe has also, in certain small and improbable places, generated minds that can dream impossible things and feel them completely. The archive, when it was finished, would be an argument for consciousness, for dreaming, for the particular and irreplaceable value of the human sleeping mind. Mara sat with this for a long time. She was a scientist. She believed in evidence. She had spent her career trying to understand, through careful observation and measurement, what sleep was for. She had always suspected that the conventional explanations, while true, were incomplete. That memory consolidation and threat rehearsal and emotional processing, while real functions of dreaming sleep, were not the whole picture. She had been right. The whole picture was larger than she could have imagined, and she was in it. She was part of it. Every night when she'd finally, exhaustedly, fitfully slept and dreamed, even the thin and unsatisfying dreams of a chronic insomniac, she had been contributing. Her dreams had been collected. Her particular quality of experience, the emotional life of this particular woman who had spent years trying to understand sleep while failing to achieve it, who had built a career around a thing she could not properly experience herself, who had kept going anyway, out of stubbornness and genuine love for the question. That particular quality was in the archive. It was there. It was woven in. And the collector near her communicated in a way that she felt rather than heard, that this specific contribution had a specific value. That the dreams of someone who struggled to reach them were different from the dreams of easy sleepers. That difficulty, it turned out, created a particular shade of longing that showed up in dreams in a way that nothing else quite replicated. Her insomnia had not been a failure. It had been a particular kind of dreaming, and the universe apparently had a use for it. Breathe in now, and slowly out. Let whatever you are holding in your shoulders release. Let your jaw soften. There is nothing to hold on to. The story will carry you. The night will carry you. You can let go. There is a way that Mara later described the experience of that autumn night in the journal she began keeping afterward, in the private language she developed for experiences that did not have existing vocabulary. She called the place she accessed the night garden. It was not a garden, of course. It was not a place in any physical sense. But the word garden captured something important about it, the sense of cultivation, of something that grows according to both nature and care, of a space that is tended without being controlled. A garden is not wild and it is not manufactured. It is a collaboration between the gardener and the growing thing. The night garden was like that. It was the space where the human dreaming mind operated, and it was both private and shared. Private in the sense that each dream was its own enclosed experience, existing fully within one's sleeping mind, not accessible to others in real time. Shared in the sense that all dreaming minds inhabited the same fundamental territory, that the emotional raw materials of human dreaming were, at some deep level, common property. Grief was the same in every language. Wonder was the same in every century. The specific textures of these feelings differed between individuals and cultures and times. But the fundamental shape of them, the way they occupied the body and the mind, the way they created a particular kind of inner weather, this was consistent. This was, in some sense, the common language of the species. The collectors understood this better than most humans did. They had been listening to the common language for a very long time. Mara moved through the night garden in her dream state, the collector close beside her, and she began to see things she had not initially perceived. She became aware that the space was not empty between the individual dreaming minds, that there was something in the space between, something thin as atmosphere and just as pervasive, something that connected the separate private dreams without merging them, the collective resonance of dreaming humanity. She thought of how a forest is not simply a collection of individual trees, that there is something in a forest that is not present in any individual tree, a particular quality of air and light and sound and life that emerges from the whole, that cannot be explained by summing the parts. She had felt this as a child, walking in forests, feeling that specific sense of being held and surrounded by something much larger than herself, something that was aware of her in some way she couldn't articulate. The night garden had that quality. The sleeping city she was part of, the sleeping people all around her, each one behind their own closed eyes in their own private dream, were also somehow together in this, contributing to a collective atmosphere that was real, even if unmeasurable by the instruments she used in her laboratory. The sum of all their sleeping emotional experience was creating something that existed in the space between, something she had no word for. She thought of whale song. She had read once about how whale songs travel through the ocean, how a song that begins in one ocean basin can eventually reach another, attenuated but still intact, still recognizable, how the ocean carries them, how all the whales swimming the world's waters were connected. Through the medium of water and sound, into something that was not quite community in the human sense, but was not quite solitude either. The night garden was like the ocean in that analogy. The sleeping minds were the whales, and the collectors were the researchers on a boat above the surface, recording with instruments of extraordinary sensitivity, understanding something that the whales themselves were not aware of knowing, that they were not alone in the dark, that their songs were reaching places they would never go, that their voices were carrying something essential and irreplaceable across distances they could not imagine. The collector communicated something about this, about how humans had no idea what their dreams were doing, not in a condescending way, in the way that you might tell someone that a thing they do naturally and without thinking is actually extraordinary. The way you might tell a child who has always been able to sing that singing is not in fact something everyone can do, that the ease they feel with it is not universal, that what comes naturally to them is a gift. Human beings dreamed every night without any awareness of the significance of what they were doing. They went to sleep in order to rest, in order to process, in order to survive the next day's demands, and in the process of doing this ordinary biological necessary thing, they also generated something the universe would travel unimaginable distances to collect. The collector communicated gratitude again, and this time Mara did not cry. This time she felt something different, something quieter, something that was almost, not quite, but almost peace. She had spent 11 years feeling broken because her sleep was difficult, feeling inadequate in a fundamental way, failing at a basic biological function, lying awake in the dark while the world slept around her. She had treated her insomnia as an obstacle, as a thing to be overcome, as evidence of some dysfunction in her nervous system that needed to be corrected. She had never once considered that it might be evidence of something else, of a sensitivity so fine that it placed her, reliably and repeatedly, at exactly the threshold where the ordinary world and the night garden met. Not close enough to be a dreamer, not far enough away to be simply awake, suspended at the border for 11 years in the exact place where perception was possible. She had not been failing to sleep, she had been living at the edge, and the edge, it turned out, was not a bad place to be. The collector moved away from her, gently, continuing its work, and Mara felt the awareness of it receding without feeling abandoned. She understood that the work was the priority. The night was finite. The sleeping minds around her would not sleep forever. The window of the dream state was narrow and valuable, and there was much to gather. She let it go about its business, and she drifted in the night garden, not asleep in the ordinary sense, not awake in the ordinary sense, but something in between that she had spent her career studying without ever quite experiencing this fully, this deeply, this completely. She rested. For the first time in the 11 years, she rested properly. There is something Mara noticed about the collectors, the longer she observed them in that long night's liminal space. They were not simply taking. This had been her initial interpretation, and she had quickly understood it was incomplete. The word collection implies one-directional movement, a removal of something from one place to another, but what she witnessed was more like exchange. The collectors, in the process of receiving and carrying away the dreams they gathered, left something behind. Not in the dreams themselves, not inside the sleeping minds, not in any way that could be observed or measured by any instrument she knew, but in the space of the night garden, in that atmospheric in-between where the collective resonance of dreaming humanity existed, they left something. It was subtle. It was something that would not register as anything more than a good night's sleep to anyone experiencing it. But it was there. Mara perceived it the way she perceived everything in this state, sideways, with the soft focus that allowed peripherally visible things to remain visible. It was a kind of enrichment, an addition to the quality of the space, a return of something that had been processed and transformed in whatever way the collectors processed and transformed things, something that had passed through whatever the archive was and come back changed. Changed into what? The word that came to her, and that she was not entirely satisfied with but had no better replacement for, was nourishment. The collectors left something that nourished the night garden, that fed back into the collective resonance of human dreaming in a way that made it incrementally richer, that added depth to the emotional territory available to sleeping minds, that expanded slightly the range of what a dreaming human could feel, that gave the night garden something it hadn't had before they arrived. It was a collaboration, not an extraction, but an exchange, not a taking, but a reciprocity. They came for the dreams. They left behind what the dreams had made possible in the larger structure, a kind of nutritional feedback, a return of value, a contribution to the very thing they were collecting from. Mara thought about this for a long time. She thought about how this changed the meaning of human dreaming, not just as a contribution to something vast and external, but as part of an ongoing reciprocal relationship, something that human beings had been participating in without awareness since the first complex dreams of the first dreaming ancestors, a relationship that had been shaping human dream life incrementally for millennia. She thought about how the emotional range of human experience had expanded throughout history, how the ancient literature she had encountered in her education, the oldest stories humans had written down, were full of emotion but a narrower range of emotion than what came later. How the inner lives depicted in stories grew more complex across centuries, how the capacity for certain kinds of emotional self-reflection seemed to deepen across generations, how the dreams that people reported throughout history, in the records that existed, seemed to change over time, to grow more elaborate, more emotionally complex, more rich with nuance. Perhaps this was partly because of the return, the nourishment the collectors left behind, the enrichment of the night garden, slowly, over centuries, deepening the soil in which human dreaming grew. If this was true, then the relationship between humans and collectors was not new. It was not a recent discovery or a recent development. It was an ancient compact, unspoken and mostly unperceived, between the dreaming species on this small world and the patient beings who had been drawn to it since the beginning of complex human sleep. The collectors had invested in human dreaming, and human dreaming, enriched by their returning gifts, had become more valuable to them in return. A virtuous cycle, sustained across a timescale that made historical time feel like a single afternoon. Mara felt something she recognised from her research, from the moments in her work when a data pattern resolved into an explanation she hadn't expected, the particular intellectual emotion of a theory revealing itself to be true, the satisfaction of understanding. The collector that had stayed close to her returned at this point. She sensed it back near her, and it communicated something new, something personal. It communicated to her that she was not simply an observer of this relationship. She was an instrument in it. Her 11 years of surface-skimming sleep, her restless residence at the threshold of the night garden, had made her something specific, a kind of resonator. Someone whose particular neurological sensitivity meant that the field of the night garden was slightly stronger in her vicinity, that the collective resonance was slightly more accessible near her, that the collectors could work with slightly more clarity and completeness in her presence. Her insomnia had not been an obstacle. It had been a service, an involuntary, unperceived, entirely unconscious service, but a service nonetheless. She had spent 11 years providing something to the collectors that they valued, and that she had no idea she was providing, simply by virtue of being what she was, a restless, threshold-dwelling, impossibly awake person who happened to love sleep and happened to study it and happened to live, always, at its edge. The collector communicated what she interpreted as a formal acknowledgement, not a thank you in the casual sense, something more considered, more deliberate, the kind of acknowledgement that comes between parties in a long relationship when one of them finally realises the relationship exists. We have always known you. It communicated, in the way that the sea knows a particular shoreline, in the way that the wind knows a particular hill, not with individual recognition, not the way one person knows another person, but with the specific intimate awareness of the thing that returns, again and again, to the same place. She had been a landmark in the night garden, a reliable feature of this particular city's dreaming geography, and now she knew. She breathed, slowly, in her reading chair. The night outside had deepened. The maple tree was a dark shape against a darker sky. The cold tea sat untouched beside her. Somewhere in the city other people were sleeping and dreaming and contributing their emotional inventions to the archive without any knowledge of what they were doing, which was fine, which was as it was supposed to be, which was, in its way, beautiful. The most generous acts, she thought, are the ones we perform without knowing we are performing them. The most profound contributions are sometimes the ones we don't plan. Let yourself sink a little further now, dear listener. Let your breathing carry you, in and out, each breath a small tide, each exhale a letting go. You're safe here. The night is gentle. The dark is full of something good. Mara had a question that had been forming since early in the night, and she asked it now. She asked about purpose, not the purpose of the collection, which she understood, or understood as much as she was able. She asked about purpose from the human side, about what any individual dreaming person was supposed to do with this knowledge, if they had it, about whether knowing changed anything. The collector's response came in layers, as the best answers do. The first layer was simple: knowing does not change what you are contributing. The dreams that you generate each night are not more valuable because you understand their significance, and they are not less valuable because you don't. The archive does not distinguish between dreaming minds that are aware of the collection and dreaming minds that are not. The contribution is the same. This was strangely comforting. It meant that every sleeping person, regardless of what they believed or understood or had been told, was already contributing, already part of it, already valuable, not as a potential contributor, not conditionally, not if they fulfilled certain requirements, already right now simply by being alive and dreaming. The second layer was more nuanced. Knowing did change something, the collector communicated. Not the value of what was contributed, but the quality of the dreamer's relationship to their own sleep, to their own inner life, to the experience of dreaming. People who understood what dreaming was, in any of the ways it could be understood, not necessarily this particular understanding, not necessarily any specific knowledge of collectors and archives, but any genuine recognition of the depth and significance of the dreaming mind. Those people dreamed differently. Not better or worse, not more or less valuable to the archive. but differently, with more attention, with more willingness to remember, with more respect for the images and feelings that arose in them during the night. And this, the collector communicated, mattered. Because the quality of a dreaming mind's engagement with its own dreams affected the richness of what it generated, not in a simple cause and effect way, not as a formula, but in the organic, networked way that attention always affects experience. When you pay attention to something, it reveals more of itself. When you take seriously a capacity you have, that capacity tends to deepen. The people who remembered their dreams, who wrote them down, who turned them over in the morning the way you turn a stone to see what's underneath, who allowed themselves to be curious about the strange internal landscapes their sleeping minds created. These people dreamed with more complexity and range and depth. Not always, not uniformly. But there was a relationship between attention and richness that held generally. The archive, in other words, benefited from dreamers who took dreaming seriously. Not as a mystical practice, not as prophecy, not as a source of special information that the waking world was withholding, simply as an aspect of consciousness worthy of curiosity, worthy of noticing. Mara thought about her research, about the subjects in her laboratory whose dream reports, the verbal descriptions of what they had experienced during sleep, varied so widely in their richness and depth. Some people woke from REM sleep and could barely remember anything, not images, not feelings, just the certainty that something had happened and the trail of it had evaporated. Others woke with detailed, emotionally vivid, narratively coherent accounts of complex inner experiences that could last half an hour to recount. She had always assumed this variation was purely neurological, that some people were simply better dream rememberers than others, that the consolidation of dream memory during sleep was more efficient in some brains than in others, that it was a hardware difference rather than a practice difference. But the collectors apparently knew something her measurements didn't capture. The relationship between attention and dreaming went both ways. You could, with practice and genuine curiosity, expand your relationship with your own dreaming mind. Not manufacture better dreams, not control the content, but open a wider channel between the sleeping self and the waking self, so that more crossed over, so that the night's emotional work was more available to the morning's consciousness, and the night's emotional work available to morning consciousness changed things. The dreamer who remembered their grief dreams grieved differently while awake, with more access to the full depth of what they felt, with less of it trapped below the surface where it couldn't be understood or metabolized. The dreamer who remembered their joy dreams carried a richer palette of joy into waking life. The dreamer who paid attention to the strange, impossible, physically illegal experiences of flying and time travelling and being in places that were simultaneously, many places had a more flexible, more creative, more elastic sense of what was possible. This was the third layer of the collector's answer. Knowing and paying attention and valuing the dreaming mind changed the dreamer, made them more fully themselves, made them more capable of the full range of human experience, which, from the perspective of the archive, was also good, because more fully human dreamers generated richer contributions. But from Mara's perspective, the perspective of a person who was also one of the dreamers, this felt like the part that mattered most. Not the archive, not the cosmological project, not the patient beings who travelled unthinkable distances to collect from the sleeping world, but this, the dreams you have, the ones you're having right now, on this night, in the gentle dark where you're beginning to drift. The images and feelings and impossible experiences that your sleeping mind is already beginning to generate, they are not nothing, they are not random, they are not mere neurological noise, they are the most honest thing you do. They are you, undefended. They are you without performance. They are you generating in the unguarded dark emotional experiences that have never existed before in exactly this form, in exactly this combination, with exactly this particular quality that is yours and only yours, and that is worth knowing. That is worth carrying into your sleep tonight and every night. You are a dreamer, and the universe finds your dreams worth travelling for. The first light of dawn was an hour away when Mara felt the shift. The night garden was changing, not disappearing, not ending. It didn't work that way, she understood by now. The night garden was always there. It was the dreaming space, the territory of the sleeping mind, and as long as mind slept and dreamed, it would persist. but the particular quality of the night, the deep, dark, richest hours when the most sleeping happened and the dreaming was densest, was beginning to lighten. The collectors were completing their work. She could sense it in the way the space around her was gradually becoming less populated. The careful movements she had been aware of since the beginning of the night slowing, completing, concluding. The beings who had been moving through the sleeping city with such deliberateness and care were preparing to leave. The one that had stayed near her, her guide through this night's understanding, was still there. She could feel it, though by now she was beginning to feel the pull of ordinary consciousness returning. The tide of wakefulness that comes before dawn, the body beginning to surface. She wanted to ask one more thing before it left. She asked about grief. It was on her mind because of a dream she had briefly glimpsed earlier in the night. Not her own dream, one the collector had shown her in the way it had shown her the dream of coming home. This one had been different, darker at the edges, with the quality of loss, of the specific pain that comes not from what is happening, but from what is no longer happening. The pain of absence, of the space where something was and is no longer. Someone in the city was dreaming about a person who had died, and the dream was, in its way, beautiful. Not beautiful the way sunsets are beautiful. Not beautiful as a pleasant thing. Beautiful the way deep honesty is beautiful, the way a piece of music that makes you cry is beautiful. Beautiful because it was true. She asked whether grief dreams were among the ones the collectors valued most. The collector communicated something she spent a long time afterward trying to articulate in her journal. It communicated that all emotions were valuable, that the archive did not rank emotional experiences the way a chart might rank songs, that richness came in many forms and the archive needed all of them. But it communicated something else too, something about grief specifically. Grief, it communicated, was among the most distinctly human emotions, not in the sense that other beings did not feel loss, many did. But grief as humans experienced it had a particular quality that was rare, a paradoxical quality, the way human grief contained love, the way the pain of losing something was inseparable from the love that had existed for it, the way grief was, at its most fundamental, a love with nowhere left to go. This combination, love and loss held simultaneously, experienced as one feeling rather than two, was not universal. It was specific, and the archive valued it accordingly. Not more than joy, not more than wonder, not more than any of the other emotional landscapes human dreaming generated, but specifically, with a recognition of its particular nature. Mara thought about her own grief. She had not spoken much about it, even to her therapist, even to her journal. There was grief in her life, the ordinary accumulation of losses that any life eventually accrues. The people gone, the paths not taken, the version of herself she had imagined at 20 and who had not quite arrived. Small griefs mostly, in the scale of things, but persistent and real. She thought about how those griefs showed up in her dreams, in the dreams she occasionally remembered, which were more often than not tinged with loss. People she loved who appeared and then couldn't quite be reached. Places she loved that were somehow wrong, somehow not quite the version of themselves she remembered. The specific dream sadness of almost, of close but not quite, of the version of happiness that keeps the distance of one room. That was in the archive. Those dreams, those particular shades of longing and almost and love persisting past its object, they were there. They had been collected. They were woven into the vast interwoven structure alongside the flying dreams and the ocean dreams and the dreams of impossible joy and all the rest. Her grief was part of the archive. And somehow this helped. Not in a way she could easily explain. Not because it made the grief less, but because it made it visible in a new way. Because it gave it a context that was not just personal. Because it placed her small and ordinary losses inside something much larger. Something that reached out to the stars, something that had been building across the whole history of human sleep. She was not alone in her grief. Obviously she had known this in an abstract sense. Everyone knew it in an abstract sense. But the abstract knowledge of shared grief and the felt sense of shared grief were different things. And in the night garden, at the edge of dawn, she felt it. All the grief that sleeping minds had ever dreamed. All the love that had nowhere left to go. All of it, somewhere, part of something. The collector near her communicated something final. Something she did not try to translate into words in her journal. Something that did not require words. Something that was simply a quality of presence, of witnessing, of acknowledgement. It had been with her through the whole night. It had shown her things, and now it was leaving. She felt its withdrawal the way you feel the absence of warmth when something warm moves away, not painful, but perceptible. A change in the quality of the space around her, a slight cooling, a slight lightening. And then it was gone. She was alone in her reading chair, in her small apartment, in the pre-dawn of an ordinary October morning, and everything was exactly as it had been the night before, except that nothing was the same. The tea was cold. The maple tree outside was just visible as a shape in the early grey light. Her body ached slightly from sleeping in the chair, which was not ideal for the spine, though she noted with some surprise that she felt rested in a way she could not remember feeling in years. She sat still for a long time. She did not reach for her phone. She did not reach for the notebook she kept on the side table. She simply sat and let what had happened be what it was, without immediately trying to record or analyse or explain. She had learned, perhaps, the most important thing that 11 years of studying sleep had not taught her, that the night was full, that sleep was not a subtraction, not a closing down, not the off-position of consciousness. It was an opening, a vast and patient and purposeful opening, and she had finally been inside it. By the time the sky had lightened fully and the maple tree outside her window had resolved from a shape into itself, red and amber and lit by the low angled light of a Pacific Northwest October morning, Mara had made a decision. She was not going to tell her colleagues, not immediately, not in the way you might think. She was not going to walk into the laboratory and announce what had happened. She was not going to write a paper, not going to attempt to fit what she had experienced into the frameworks her field had developed. Not yet. She understood that what had happened in her reading chair was not translatable into the language of peer-reviewed science without something being lost in translation. Something essential. Something that lived not in data, but in felt understanding. She was going to sit with it. She was going to let it work on her the way meaningful experiences work on you when you give them time, the way a good book stays with you, the way a conversation that changed something stays with you. She was going to let it become part of her before she tried to do anything with it, but she was also going to change how she worked. She had been studying sleep as a biological phenomenon, which was true and important and not wrong, but it was partial. She had been looking through one lens when the thing she was looking at required many lenses. She had been measuring neural oscillations and cataloguing REM periods and analysing sleep architecture when the thing she was studying was also a night garden, also a contribution to something vast, also a reciprocal relationship between dreaming minds and whatever it was that valued their dreaming. She did not know how to measure that. She was not sure it could be measured, but she could study it differently. She could bring to her research a quality of attention that was less certain of what it was looking for, more open to what it found. She could ask her research subjects not just what they remembered dreaming, but how the dream had felt, what quality of feeling it had left behind, what it had done to the temperature of their inner world. She could treat the dreaming mind not just as a subject to be studied, but as a collaborator in the study. She went to her kitchen and made new tea, the chamomile again, the old habit, and she stood at the window while the kettle heated and she looked at the maple tree. She had lived in this apartment for 7 years. She had looked at this tree through this window most mornings. She'd seen it change with the seasons, seen it bare and then budding and then full, and now in this autumn extravagance of red and amber and gold. She was not sure she had ever actually looked at it. Not in the way she had looked last evening, on the sidewalk, head tilted back. Not with that quality of undefended, unagendered attention that had apparently improbably been the thing that changed everything. She looked at it now. She let it be what it was. A living thing, doing what living things do in autumn, releasing what it no longer needed, brilliant at the moment of releasing. She let herself feel what she felt looking at it, which was something warm and quiet and close to grateful. Grateful for the fact of trees, for the fact of autumn, for the fact of mornings when the light was like this. She stood at the window for several minutes, and then she took her tea to the reading chair and sat in the place where she had spent the night. She thought about the people who would never know that their dreams were being collected. Every person sleeping in this building, in this neighbourhood, in this city. in this sleeping world. The people who would wake this morning complaining about a bad night's sleep without knowing that even a bad night's sleep had contributed something. The people who would say they never dreamed without knowing that the absence of dream memory was not the absence of dreaming, that the dream had happened regardless of whether they could retrieve it. She thought about the retired schoolteacher upstairs, who had been dreaming of a beach. She did not know which beach. She did not know what quality of feeling the beach had had in the dream, whether it was the beach as she remembered it, or the beach transformed by dream logic into something more and other. But the dream was in the archive now. The teacher's particular love for that place, her specific relationship to water and sand and the feeling of summer in childhood, her own private version of those universal experiences that was preserved. She thought about the young couple upstairs, what they had contributed separately and what they had contributed together, the way their dreams had touched at the edges, two private experiences slightly coloured by shared proximity and shared warmth, and the particular emotional resonance of sleeping next to someone you love. She thought about the night shift worker, his dreams of running and air and physical freedom, the specific quality of joy in a body that worked, in movement that felt effortless, in the particular dream freedom of not being limited by what the waking body can do. All of it, collected, all of it, carried somewhere she would never go, all of it, woven into something that she had glimpsed but could not fully comprehend. She opened her notebook. She had decided not to write immediately, but she had changed her mind. Some things needed to be written while they were still warm, before the ordinary world filled back in around them and made them feel smaller than they were. She wrote, "The night is not empty. It only looks empty from this side. From the other side, from inside the dreaming, it is full, unbearably full. Full the way the ocean is full, not just with water, but with everything the water contains and carries and holds in suspension. We go there every night without knowing what we are walking into. We come back every morning changed in ways we cannot account for. And in between, something happens. Something that does not need our understanding to be true." She stopped writing. She looked out at the maple tree. The light had changed while she was writing, the morning growing brighter, the particular low golden light of early autumn morning that is available for only a short time before the day becomes itself and loses that particular quality. She had caught it. The light was there and she had noticed it. She thought, this is what it is to pay attention, not a skill so much as a practice. Not a talent so much as a choice, made repeatedly to show up for the particular quality of this moment rather than the previous moment or the anticipated next moment. To be here, in the light, before it changes. She had spent 11 years failing to sleep and succeeding at her work and accumulating a life that felt like it was missing something she couldn't quite identify. She thought she knew now what it was. Not sleep exactly, not the sleep itself, but the understanding that the sleep was for something, that the night was for something, that the closing of the eyes and the loosening of the grip and the slide into the dream dark was not a cessation, but a journey, and that the journey had a destination, even if the destination was beyond anything she could see from where she stood. Purposefulness, she thought. That was the word she had been missing. The particular nourishment of knowing that what you're doing means something, that your small and private and ordinary experience is connected to something larger, that you're not simply enduring the night but contributing to it. She had known that about her work. She had felt it in her research. The sense that studying sleep was studying something important, something central to what it meant to be human, something that mattered. She had not known it about her sleep itself. She knew it now. She finished her tea. She stood up from the reading chair, her back protesting mildly, and she stretched, and she felt the body's happiness at being used, and then rested, and now awake. The specific morning body pleasure of the transition between sleeping and waking. She felt it deliberately. She let herself feel it. She went to the window. She put her hand on the glass. The maple tree was there, burning quietly in the morning light. She would go to work today. She would look at her research with new eyes. Or not new eyes, the same eyes that had always been there, but with a new quality of attention behind them. She would do her ordinary work. She would study what people did when they slept. And she would carry with her, quietly, privately, Not for sharing yet, and maybe not ever. Not in its full form. Not in the form that lived beyond the reach of peer review. The knowledge of what she had been inside the night before. The night garden. The collectors. The archive that was being built from the dreams of every sleeping person on Earth. The universe listening. She would carry it gently. And tonight, when she went back to her bed, or back to this reading chair, or wherever sleep eventually found her, she would go differently. Not without the difficulty. She knew the difficulty would still be there, the restlessness, the surface skimming, the long hours of almost but not quite, but without the shame, without the sense of failing. She would go as what she was, a dreamer at the threshold, a landmark in the night garden. A mind that spent its sleeping hours suspended at the exact place where the ordinary and the extraordinary met, where the human and the something else entirely came close enough to communicate. She would go knowing, and that was enough. That was, perhaps, everything. And so, dear listener, we arrive at the edge of this story, the place where the telling dissolves and what remains is simply the feeling it leaves behind. You have travelled tonight. You have been with Mara in her reading chair, in the liminal space of the night garden, where the collectors move with their extraordinary care. You have understood something about the dreaming mind, about what happens when you close your eyes and the world falls away and the deeper world opens up. And now, as this story softens and quiets, as the words become slower and further apart, I want you to feel something. Feel the weight of your body in the place where you are resting, the pressure of the surface beneath you, the warmth of whatever covers you. Feel your breathing, which has been doing its patient work this whole time without any instruction from you. In and out, the oldest rhythm you know. You're about to dream. Whatever your dreams bring tonight, wherever they take you, whatever feelings they generate in the honest dark of your sleeping mind, know this: they matter. Not because of anything you need to do, not because you need to remember them, or analyse them, or understand them. They matter simply because they are yours, because they are the most unguarded, most honest, most genuinely you part of your experience, and the night receives them. Let yourself go gently now. Let the words of this story thin out and become background, become texture, become the quality of the dark rather than the content of it. Let your thoughts soften at the edges. Let whatever is unresolved remain unresolved for now. It will be there in the morning. The night does not require you to solve anything. The night only requires you to dream. So dream, dear listener. Dream whatever comes. Dream the impossible things. Dream the ordinary things that become extraordinary inside the sleeping mind. Dream the people you love and the places you have loved, and the feelings you did not know you were carrying until sleep revealed them to you. The night garden is waiting. The night is full, and somewhere, in the patient dark, something is listening for the particular quality of what only you can dream. Go now, close the last door of the waking world behind you, and let the dreaming begin. Good night. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to watch more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps us continue creating more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. Have you ever had a dream so vivid and emotionally real that it stayed with you all day, and you found yourself wondering where that feeling actually came from? Tell us about it in the comments. We read every single one. There are things worth knowing about Mara Voss before the night truly begins, things that illuminate why this particular woman, in this particular reading chair, in this particular city on this particular October evening, was the one who finally saw what had always been there. She had grown up in a small house in the middle part of the country, in a state known more for its weather than its landscapes, where winters were long and grey, and the sky in February had a quality of absolute flatness that some people found depressing, and Mara had always, privately, found oddly comforting. There was something honest about a grey sky that made no promises, something restful in the way it spread itself evenly across the horizon, without drama, without performance. She had been a quiet child, not shy exactly. She spoke when she had something to say, but she was not a child who felt the need to fill silence, and she recognised early that this made adults slightly uncomfortable, which she found puzzling. Silence in her experience was not empty. Silence had texture and quality that varied considerably depending on where you were and who was in it with you. The silence of her parents' living room on Sunday mornings was completely different from the silence of the school library, which was completely different from the silence of the open field behind her grandmother's house, where she sometimes went to sit in the tall grass and look at the sky. She'd been interested in the sky from early on, not in a romantic way, not the way people become interested in stars as metaphors for wishes and dreams, in a more literal way. She was interested in what was actually there. She'd gotten a library book about astronomy at age 9, and had been surprised to discover how much there was that she hadn't known about. How the ordinary sky she saw every day was a surface with extraordinary depth behind it. Layers upon layers of distance and matter and time. The nearest star 4 light years away, and the farthest galaxies so distant that the light reaching her eyes had left them before the Earth existed. This had affected her in a way she never quite articulated but never forgot. The idea that what you were seeing and what was actually there were not always the same thing, that surfaces concealed depths, that the ordinary could be, if you had the right information, suddenly revealed as extraordinary. She had never lost that interest. She had studied biology in college, then neuroscience in graduate school, drawn to the organ that was itself a kind of sky, a surface with extraordinary depth behind it, a thing that looked like grey matter from the outside, and was, from the inside, a whole universe. She had specialised in sleep not because she planned to, but because sleep turned out to be one of the most interesting unsolved problems in neuroscience, and Mara was drawn to unsolved problems the way other people were drawn to comfortable certainties. Nobody fully understood sleep. After decades of research, after enormous advances in imaging technology and pharmacology and neuroscience, the basic question of why we sleep remained genuinely open. The theories were good and getting better, but the feeling persisted among the researchers she respected most that the theories, good as they were still not reaching the thing itself. That sleep was deeper than any of the explanations for it. She had spent 11 years with this feeling, spending her days in a laboratory, studying something she was also living with every night in the most intimate and unsatisfying possible way, going home from sessions where she had observed subjects moving through clean, orderly sleep cycles, and then lying in her own dark room while the hours accumulated and her body refused to do the thing she had spent all day watching other bodies do with apparent ease. She had long since made her peace with the paradox, or rather, she had accepted it as a feature of her life rather than a problem to be solved. She had stopped fighting it as actively in the last couple of years, had found a kind of accommodation with her sleeplessness that was not peace. Exactly. It was at least not war. She used the wakeful hours to read, to think, to move quietly through the apartment, to stand at the window and watch the city at 3 a.m, which had its own beauty, its own particular quality of light and silence that was unavailable at any other hour. She had become, in a sense, a connoisseur of night. Not because she had chosen to be, but because the night had chosen her. And so she noticed things about the dark that other people, sleeping through it, missed. She noticed how the quality of the silence changed as the night deepened, becoming more complete, more encompassing, settling around the city like a substance rather than simply an absence of sound. She noticed how the light from the street lamps had a different character at 2 a.m. than at 10 p.m, something cooler and more isolated, each lamp standing in its own small pool while the dark pressed in from all sides. She noticed how certain thoughts that were impossible to think during the day, thoughts that were too large or too unformed or too honest for the lit hours, could be thought in the dark, when the social performance of waking life had stopped and there was only herself and the night. She had accumulated a significant body of 3 a.m. thought that she never shared with anyone. It lived in a separate notebook from the work notebooks, a battered thing she'd bought in a drugstore and which had no particular organisation or intention. Just thought, unfiltered, as it came in the dark. She returned to it sometimes during daylight hours and found it both more and less coherent than she expected. Less in the sense that the logic was sometimes strange, the connections between ideas loose and associative in a way that didn't always hold up in full consciousness. More in the sense that the honesty was consistent. 3 a.m, it turned out, was very hard to lie to yourself in. She'd written things in that notebook about her loneliness, about the ways her life had narrowed over the years of the sleeplessness, the social contractions, the declined invitations, the relationships that had thinned and then stopped. Not dramatically, not with any particular crisis. just with the gradual falling away of things when there's not enough energy to sustain them. She had written about what she missed. She had written about what she had learned to stop missing because missing it was too expensive. She had not written about hope. Not in a long time. She was not a hopeless person. That would be too simple. She was more like a person who had become careful about what she expected, who had learned to locate her satisfactions in the available, rather than the longed for, who had made of her constrained and particular life something functional and occasionally meaningful, if not what she had once imagined it would be. She was good at her work. That was real, and it was enough. Or it had been enough, or she had been telling herself it was enough, which was perhaps not quite the same thing. On the October evening when the maple tree stopped her on the sidewalk, when something in the quality of the light made her tilt her head back and look up and stand there for a full minute, feeling something she couldn't name, she had been, without knowing it, at a kind of threshold in her own life. Not a crisis, not even a transition, not yet. More like a place in the terrain where the path has been gradually ascending and then suddenly, without announcement, the ground falls away on both sides and you can see. The view from such places is often startling. And often, in the stillness of that sudden visibility, things can happen that couldn't happen anywhere else. She'd stood under the maple tree. She'd looked up, and the night had noticed. The beings Mara encountered in the liminal space of that October night were not, she came to understand, what she might have imagined alien life to be. She'd grown up, as everyone who grew up watching films and reading science fiction had, with certain inherited visual vocabularies for the non-human. The silver ships and the large eyes and the particular atmosphere of encounter that science fiction had rehearsed so many times it had become its own genre of expectation. She had always been somewhat sceptical of these images, had felt, even as a child watching these films, that they were too human in their imagination, too insistent on the idea that other kinds of intelligence would be recognisable, would communicate in ways that were adjacent to human communication, would have something resembling human motivation and human form. The collectors were nothing like that. They were not exactly visible to begin with. What she perceived in the peripheral, soft-focused way of that threshold state was less a shape than a quality of presence, a concentration of attention, the sense that a particular area of space was more inhabited than the surrounding space, more organised, more intentional, and they communicated not in language but in something that operated below language, beneath the level of words and grammar, at the level where meaning existed before it had been shaped into sentences. The experience of receiving information from them was less like being told something, and more like suddenly knowing it, the way you know, upon waking from a dream, certain things that the dream has somehow transmitted without imagery or narrative, things that were just there, present, fully formed, when consciousness returned. She tried, later, to describe this in her private notebook. She wrote, "Imagine that knowledge had texture, that different kinds of understanding felt different in the body, the way different materials feel different to the touch. Something genuinely true feels different from something merely plausible. Something that comes from the deepest part of experience feels different from something that comes from the reasoning mind." What the collectors communicated had a particular texture, a quality of solidity and depth that she associated with the most fundamental thing she knew. The way she knew that water was wet, that fire was hot, that she was alive and conscious and present. Not conclusions, foundations. The information they gave her had that quality, and perhaps because of this, she never seriously questioned it. Not during the night, and not after. She was a scientist. She had spent her career being appropriately skeptical of claims that outstripped their evidence. She knew the difference between genuine knowing and motivated believing. She had no interest in self-deception. But the quality of what she received was unmistakable. This was not a dream. It was not a hallucination produced by sleep deprivation, though she had enough knowledge of sleep deprivation to know what that looked like, and this was not it. It was not a wish-fulfillment fantasy generated by a mind that had spent too many years studying something it could not experience properly. It had the texture of the real, and so she received it as real. What she understood about how the collectors perceived the world was also different from what she had expected, in the way that everything about them was different from what she had expected. They did not perceive individual dreaming minds the way she perceived individual people. They did not experience the sleeping city as a collection of separate persons, each enclosed in their own skull with their own private life. They experienced it more the way an ecologist might experience a forest, not as a collection of individual trees, but as a system, a network of relationships and flows and exchanges, a thing that was more than the sum of its parts. The dreaming minds of the city were, to them, something like a weather system. They had individual variations, of course. Each dreamer had their particular quality, their specific emotional signature, the particular way their mind constructed dream experience. Just as each tree in a forest has its individual characteristics, while also being part of the forest's larger system. The collectors were aware of both levels simultaneously, the individual and the collective, and moved between them with ease. What they were drawn to in their gathering was not the content of the dreams, not the specific imagery, not the narrative, not the particular forms that the dreaming mind used to represent its experience. These were, from their perspective, the outer layer, the shell. What they were after was inside the shell, the emotional frequency, the specific quality of feeling made form that each dream generated, a thing as particular as a fingerprint and as universal as breath. Mara tried to understand this, and the collector nearest her helped her by showing her something she could almost see. She perceived briefly what it was like to be them, not fully, not completely, nothing like the full experience of whatever their consciousness was, but a partial impression, enough to understand something. She perceived how the dreaming world appeared to them. It appeared as light. Not visual light, not the photons that stimulated the rods and cones in human eyes. Something more fundamental. Each dreaming mind was a point of luminosity, and the quality of its light varied with the quality of its dreaming. Some were bright and varied and complex, some were dim and repetitive. Some pulsed with a slow, deep rhythm that communicated great age, the dreams of very old minds that had been dreaming for decades and had developed a kind of depth and richness that young minds didn't yet have. Some flickered with the rapid energy of young dreams, children's dreams, which were vivid and plastic and often wild with the particular freedom of a mind that hadn't yet learned to constrain itself. The whole city was a field of light, and the collectors moved through the light the way pollinators move through a garden, drawn to particular qualities, particular intensities, particular combinations that they could recognize and that they knew would contribute something specific to the archive. She understood from this why her insomnia had made her interesting to them. A dreaming mind that spent most of its sleeping hours near the surface, not fully in the dream, was unusual. Most minds in deep sleep burned bright and then had to be approached with particular care. The way you approach a bright light that might be moved if you touched it too directly. Mara's light was different, softer, more accessible, more like a lamp than a star, and it had a quality she later thought of as translucency. The threshold state she occupied in her restless surface-skimming sleep was itself a kind of dreaming she came to understand. Not the full, vivid dreamwork of REM sleep, but something softer, something that had its own particular character and its own particular value to the collectors. The dreams of the threshold had a quality of longing that other kinds of dreaming didn't have, because the threshold dreamer is always close to something they can't quite reach, close to the full surrender of sleep, close to the vivid territory of the real dream state, but not quite there. And from that position of almost but not quite, the heart generates feelings that are specific to that position. Longing, reaching, the particular ache of proximity. These were, she was now told, among the rarest things the archive contained. Most minds either slept or didn't. Most slept deeply and dreamed richly, and their contributions were full and vivid. The threshold dwellers, the restless ones, the surface skimmers were few. Their contributions were quiet, but they had a specific quality that the deep dreamers' contributions lacked. The colour of almost, the music of not yet. Mara had been generating this for 11 years, every night from her position at the edge, giving without knowing she was giving, contributing without choosing to contribute, creating from her difficulty something that her difficulty was uniquely positioned to create. Her insomnia had been, all along, its own kind of gift, not to her, or not primarily to her, but to the archive, to the vast, patient, ongoing project of collecting what the sleeping human world produced. She had been, all this time, exactly what was needed. The archive, Mara came to understand over the course of that long night, was not simply a collection, it was closer to a memory, not human memory, which is reconstructive, partial, subject to revision and distortion, organised by emotion and significance in ways that don't always match what actually happened. Something more complete, more faithful, more like what you might imagine perfect memory to be, if memory could be perfect, if nothing was lost, if every moment of inner experience that had ever occurred was preserved in its entirety and available. This was what the archive was, or rather, this was what the portion of the archive pertaining to Earth was. She understood that the collectors operated across more than one world, that Earth was not their only interest, that the archive contained contributions from other places she would never see, and other kinds of conscious experience she could not imagine. But she also understood that Earth's contribution was significant, that the particular quality of human dreaming was unusual enough in the broader context of what the collectors gathered that this small and ordinary world held an important place in the archive. The human contribution was not the largest, but it was distinctive, and that distinctiveness had to do with something specific about the way human consciousness was organised, something about the relationship between the emotional and the rational in the human mind, the way these two systems, which in many other intelligent species operated more separately, were in humans unusually integrated, the way human feeling and human thought were constantly in conversation, influencing each other, complicating each other, sometimes working together and sometimes in profound tension. This tension, it turned out, was productive. The archive valued things created under productive tension more than things created in pure states. Pure joy was beautiful but limited. Pure grief was profound but narrow. It was the mixed states, the complicated emotional experiences, the feelings that contained contradictions, joy and sorrow together, love and fear together, longing and fulfillment together, that created the most complex and valuable threads. And humans were extraordinarily good at mixed states, perhaps because their evolution had required it. The long history of human development, the precariousness of early human existence, the social complexity of group living, the development of language and the self-reflective consciousness that came with it, all of this had produced a creature whose inner life was unusually complicated, unusually mixed, unusually capable of holding contradictory emotions simultaneously without being destroyed by the contradiction. The archive, Mara came to understand, was built substantially from this capacity, from the dreams of complicated, contradictory, mixed up, deeply feeling human minds. She thought about all the dreams she'd ever heard described in her research, the subjects in her laboratory who, waking from sleep, struggled to articulate what had just happened in the most private and unguarded hours of their lives. The woman who dreamed repeatedly of flying but always woke before landing and never knew if landing was possible. The retired soldier who dreamed of the wars he'd been in without the emotional noise of waking life, just the pure sensory experience stripped of politics and narrative, just what it had been like to be there, which was something he could talk about in the dream state that he could not talk about in waking life. The young mother who dreamed of the children she'd lost, not with grief exactly, but with a quality of presence that she said felt more real than most waking experiences, as if in the dream they were more themselves than they had ever been able to be. All of it, she understood now, was there. All of it, collected and preserved and woven into the archive in a way that nothing in ordinary human record-keeping could match. The archive knew the difference between what humans wrote down about their inner lives and what their inner lives actually were. It contained the actual thing. This was, she thought, perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of what she was being told. That somewhere, in whatever it was that the archive was, the actual inner experience of human beings across the whole of human history existed. Not the representations, not the words people found for their experience, which were always partial and always inadequate. Language being a remarkable tool that nevertheless consistently fell short of the fullness of what it was trying to describe. The actual experience, the way the homesick feel homesick, the way the joyful feel joy, the way the grieving carry grief, the way the loving love. All of it, not in approximation, not in description, but in the thing itself, preserved in whatever medium the archive used, in whatever way the collectors understood how to hold and keep such things. She felt something very large in response to this understanding. It was not pride, exactly. Not on behalf of the human species in any simple or self-congratulatory way. It was something more like humility in the face of the vastness of what she was coming to understand. Humility and something else, a kind of reverence, for all the people who had ever slept, for all the sleeping minds that had ever generated from the raw materials of their days and their fears and their loves and their losses, the particular quality of emotional experience that dreaming allowed, for all of it preserved, for all of it woven in. For the fact that the archive existed at all, that something somewhere valued the dreaming human heart enough to travel for it, to tend it, to receive what it freely gave each night and carry it forward into whatever came next. She sat in the night garden and felt gratitude for all the people she would never meet, for their dreams, for the fact that none of it had been wasted, not a single dream, not even the ones that were never remembered, not even the thin, unsatisfying dreams of an insomniac at 3 a.m, hovering at the threshold of real sleep, generating from difficulty the particular emotional colour of almost, of not yet, of proximity and longing. All of it kept. All of it valued. All of it part of something that no individual dreamer could see the whole of, but that each individual dreamer was, in their own particular way, essential to. She breathed. The night garden breathed with her. And somewhere in the vast between spaces where the archive lived, a new thread was added. Here is something Mara thought about for a long time after that October night. She had spent her career working at the intersection of two things that did not always coexist comfortably: scientific rigour and genuine mystery. She had chosen sleep as her research domain partly because it was mysterious, because the questions at its centre had not been answered, because working in it meant being in the presence of something genuinely unknown. She had thought of this as intellectual excitement, as the pleasure of unsolved problems. She had not, until now, understood how literally mysterious it was, how genuinely, how completely, how profoundly mysterious the sleeping mind was. Not in the temporary sense of things not yet understood, not in the sense of gaps in knowledge that better tools would eventually close, mysterious in a more fundamental sense. The kind of mystery that reveals itself to be not a gap in knowledge, but a depth of reality that keeps opening further the closer you approach it. She had approached it for 11 years, and the depth had simply kept opening. Now she understood something about why. The mystery of sleep was not fully tractable by the methods of science, because what sleep was, at its deepest level, was not fully contained within the natural world that science studied. It was a phenomenon that existed at a boundary, a membrane between the ordinary world of bodies and brains and electrochemical signalling and something else, something larger, something that the scientific tools she had spent her career refining were not designed to detect. This did not mean science was wrong, it meant science was partial. Which was, when she thought about it, something scientists were supposed to know, something that the best of them had always known, the recognition that a map is not the territory, that the models are not the things, that understanding is always approximate and always incomplete, and that the completeness it approximates is always larger than the current version of the model. She had known this intellectually. She knew it now in a different way. She thought about how she would return to her work, what would change and what would stay the same. The experiments would stay the same mostly, the rigour would stay the same, the commitment to evidence and careful observation and honest reporting would stay the same. These were not things she wanted to abandon or even modify. They were things she believed in. They were how she knew things. But the frame would change. The question she was working inside would change. She had been asking, what is sleep? What does it do? How does it work? These were good questions. They would remain good questions. She would keep working on them, but she would also be holding beneath them a larger question that she had not previously held. She would be asking, what is it for? Not in the survival sense, not in the functional adaptive sense, but in the sense that asks about purpose in the deepest way. The sense that wants to know not just how something fits into the machine of survival, but how it fits into the larger project of existence. What is sleep for? She suspected now that the answer was not one she would be able to publish in a peer-reviewed journal. She suspected that the answer lived in a different register than peer-reviewed science could reach. But she also suspected that holding the question, even silently, even without any intention of sharing it, would change the quality of her work. That research conducted by someone who held, in the background of all their technical questions, a genuine and open wondering about the deepest purpose of the phenomenon they were studying, was different from research conducted without that wondering. Not necessarily more accurate, not necessarily more rigorous, but different. More alive, perhaps. More honest to the full depth of the question. She thought about the subjects in her laboratory, the people who had volunteered to spend nights in her sleep lab, wearing electrodes, sleeping in an unfamiliar room while machines recorded their brain activity, waking to answer her questions about what they remembered. She had always been grateful to them. She had always tried to treat them well. She understood now that she owed them something more than good scientific practice. She owed them recognition. They were not simply research subjects. They were dreamers. They were contributors to something vast. Every night they slept in her laboratory, wearing her electrodes, giving her their brainwaves to study. They were also giving something else, something she had not known about, to the patient beings who moved through the sleeping world. They were dreaming, and their dreams mattered. She wanted to tell them. She knew she would not in any literal way, not in any way that would survive the scrutiny of the professional context she operated in. But she wanted to sit across from them in the morning when they woke from her study sessions and say, "What you did last night was important. Not just to me, not just to this research. What you did last night was important in a way that I cannot fully explain. You dreamed, and the universe received it." She would not say this, but she would hold it. And perhaps, she thought, there were other ways to communicate something true without stating it directly. Perhaps the quality of her attention to what her subjects told her about their dreams would change. Perhaps the care she brought to her interpretation of their experience would deepen. Perhaps something in how she treated the phenomenon she studied would shift enough to be perceptible, even to those who didn't know why. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps in the end that was the right kind of contribution from someone in her position. Not revelation, not proclamation. Just the quiet, sustained change in the quality of one researcher's attention to the thing she was researching. A landmark in the night garden, doing its particular work. There are certain mornings that you remember differently from other mornings, not because more happened in them, often less happened, but because of a quality of light, or a quality of inner state, or a particular combination of exhaustion and clarity that only comes after a night of extraordinary experience. They are present in memory in a way that ordinary mornings are not. This morning, for Mara, had that quality, even before she was fully awake, before she had opened her eyes or registered where she was, before the ordinary cognitive machinery of morning had reassembled itself into something capable of thinking and planning and anticipating the day. She felt it. Something different, something settled, something that was the residue of where she had been in the hours just past. She remembered, which was itself unusual. Most of her nights left no residue of this kind. They were either sleepless, in which case she remembered lying awake, or they contained the thin scraps of unremarkable dreaming that dissolved almost immediately on waking. She did not typically wake with the sense of having been somewhere that had changed her. This morning was different. She lay still for a few minutes before moving, which she did not usually do, usually sitting up the moment wakefulness arrived and moving immediately toward the day's first requirements. But this morning she lay still and let the residue of the night settle around her, the way you let dust settle before trying to move through a room. She could not reconstruct the full experience in waking memory. That was expected. Even lucid dreamers lost most of the content of their lucid dreams upon waking, the dream logic dissolving in the particular solvent of ordinary consciousness. What she retained was not a complete record, but something more like the essential shape of it, the main structure, the things that mattered most, the night garden, the collectors, the archive, the particular quality of being recognized. She retained the feeling, which was harder to describe than the content, a warmth, a sense of having been witnessed, accurately and with care, the feeling, which she did not often have, of being understood. Not partially understood, not understood through the convenient simplifications that most human relationships operated with, but genuinely, fully understood. Seen clearly, seen with all her particular qualities and difficulties, and not found lacking. She lay still with that feeling for as long as she could hold it, knowing it would attenuate, knowing that feelings like this always did. that the morning and the day would dilute it gradually the way light dilutes the darkness, replacing the extraordinary with the ordinary until only a trace remained. She was not sad about this. Traces were enough. The trace of understanding was still understanding. The residue of being seen was still the knowledge of having been seen. It did not require the intensity of the original experience to be real. When she finally got up, her body reported the mild discomfort of having spent the night in a reading chair, which she accepted calmly, not feeling it as a problem. She moved to the kitchen and stood at the window while the kettle heated, and she looked at the maple tree. The morning light was the thin, clear light of early November approaching, the October gold already fading toward the grey that would persist through winter. The maple had lost more leaves overnight. The branches were more visible through what remained of the canopy, the tree's structure more legible, the underlying architecture revealed by what was being released. She thought about how trees spent all spring and summer investing in their leaves, putting enormous biological resources into these temporary structures, growing them with extraordinary specificity, and then in autumn release them entirely. Let them go. Not with any apparent regret, not with any holding on, just the gradual, decisive, total release of things that had served their purpose. She had always found autumn trees beautiful. She understood now that she found them beautiful partly because they were doing something she found difficult, letting go. She acknowledged to herself, standing at the kitchen window with the kettle beginning to whisper, not a person who let things go easily. She held, she carried, she maintained the weight of things past their usefulness, because the act of release felt like loss, even when the thing being released had already been finished. The night had shown her something about this, about how the most generous act, from the perspective of the collectors, from the perspective of the archive, was the act of the dream itself. The way the sleeping mind generated something extraordinary and then released it entirely, gave it away completely, carried none of it forward into waking consciousness. Most of what the collectors gathered was, from the dreamer's perspective, simply gone, lost in the dissolution of sleep, released without any awareness of releasing. And this, she now understood, was not a loss. It was the completion of the gift. You could not give something while still holding it. The release was part of the giving. The forgetting, the dissolution, the way dreams faded in the morning light, this was not failure. It was generosity. She had spent years lamenting the forgetting. She would not, she decided at the kitchen window on that November approaching October morning, lament it anymore. She would trust that what had gone somewhere. And she did. The kettle boiled, she made her tea, she sat with it in the chair in the morning light, and she was, for this moment, at peace. Not a permanent peace, not a resolved peace. The kind of peace that comes after something genuinely significant has happened and before the ordinary world has fully re-established itself, the brief window of clarity that certain experiences leave behind. She held the warm cup with both hands. She felt her own warmth. She let the morning come toward her without moving to meet it, and the maple tree outside the window turned slowly in the light, its remaining leaves lifting and settling in a small wind she couldn't feel from inside, and the city went on around her as it always had, full of sleeping people who would wake not knowing what they had contributed in the hours just past. She knew, for them. She would carry that knowing. It would be her particular contribution, not to the archive, not to the collectors, to the waking world in whatever small and quiet ways she could manage. A different quality of attention. A different kind of care for the phenomenon she studied. A different understanding of what the people who slept in her laboratory were doing when they slept. They were dreaming. It was enough. It was, in the largest sense, everything. There was a moment in the night garden when Mara's attention was drawn, without any particular direction from the collector near her, to a specific kind of light at the edge of her perception, brighter than the others, more rapid in its flickering, more various in its colour. If the emotional frequencies she was perceiving could be called colours, which was an approximation but a useful one. Children's dreams. She understood this without needing to be told. The particular quality of dreaming in a young mind was unmistakable once you had perceived it. It was dreams without the weight of accumulated experience. Dreams unmediated by the self-consciousness that grows in the mind as it develops, as it learns how to perform itself for others, as it begins to shape its interior experience to match what is expected or acceptable. Children dreamed with a freedom that was difficult to maintain past a certain age. Not impossible. Some adults kept it. The ones who paid careful attention to their dreams, who gave them room, who had not entirely closed the membrane between their waking and their sleeping selves. But it required effort in adults. In children it was simply there, a birthright, an inheritance from the pre-social self. The collector near her communicated something about this that she had not expected. It communicated that children's contributions to the archive were disproportionately significant. Not because children dreamed more, though they did, spending a larger proportion of sleep in REM than adults, their developing brains requiring more of the dreaming state for the architectural work of building neural pathways and consolidating the enormous volume of new learning that the early years required. Not for that reason, but because children dreamed with a kind of unguarded wildness that adult dreaming rarely achieved. The archive needed both. It needed the deep, complex, emotionally intricate contributions of adult minds that had lived long enough to accumulate genuine depth of experience, that had loved and lost and hoped and failed and tried again, that had developed the specific emotional complexity that only comes from time and difficulty. But it also needed what children had, the completely unconstrained. Children's dreams went places that adult dreams very rarely went. They made connections between things that the organised, categorising adult mind would never make. They generated emotional combinations that were only possible in a mind that didn't yet know which emotions were supposed to go together. They flew without ambivalence. They transformed without hesitation. They felt things completely, at full intensity, without the moderating influence of the reflective mind that stands behind adult experience and watches it and edits it as it happens. The archive, to be complete, needed both the deep and the free, the ancient and the wild, the complicated and the simple. She thought about the children in the building around her. She did not know precisely, but apartment buildings in cities like this one typically had some. She imagined them. The specific quality of their current dreaming, whatever it was, vivid and various and completely unedited, the dreams of small people for whom the world was still new enough that everything in it was extraordinary, including the interior world, including the life of the mind, life of which they had not yet learned to take for granted. She felt something for them. Not exactly maternal. She was not a particularly maternal person by nature, and had long since made peace with the life she had built without children in it. But something in the vicinity of tenderness, for their dreaming, for the particular richness of what they gave each night without any awareness of giving. The archive kept all of it. The first dreams of minds that had only been alive for a few years, already contributing, already adding their threads, already part of the project. She thought about her own childhood dreaming and found that she could not quite reach it, memory being what it was, the early experiences dissolving into the general impressionistic warmth or difficulty of childhood without specific recoverable detail. She could not remember the actual content of dreams from that time, but she felt certain now that they had been collected. Whatever the 7-year-old Mara had dreamed, in the house in the middle part of the country, in the winter dark with the snow pressing against the windows and the radiator ticking in the corner of the room, whatever the 9-year-old Mara had dreamed after reading her library book about astronomy and lying awake for a long time after thinking about light that had travelled billions of years to reach her eyes, all of that was there. Part of the archive, part of the ongoing argument that the archive was building toward. She felt a continuity with her younger self that she did not usually feel. Usually the self of childhood felt like a different person, connected to the present self by memory and certain stubborn traits, but otherwise separate, past in the way the past is past. But tonight, understanding that the dreams of that child and the dreams of this woman were all part of the same thread, in the same vast weaving. She felt the continuity. She'd always been Mara. She'd always been dreaming. She'd always been contributing. This had always been happening. What were the oldest things in the archive? This question came to Mara in the deepest part of the night, when the threshold state she occupied had reached its furthest point, when she was as deep as she ever went, and the communication between herself and the collector nearest her was most unobstructed. What were the oldest human dreams the archive contained? The collector's response arrived in layers, as it always did. The oldest were from before there were words for them. This was the first layer, and it carried a quality that Mara struggled to describe even to herself. The dreams of human beings who did not have the language to understand what dreaming was, who woke from their dreams with no framework for what had just happened to them, who carried the emotional residue of the night's images without any way to contextualize it, any tradition to locate it in, any other person to describe it to. These dreams had a particular quality in the archive, a quality of pure, unmediated experience, because there was no layer of interpretation between the dreaming and the dream, no self-consciousness about what the dream meant or what it implied or how it compared to other dreams, just the experience, raw and complete and unprocessed. The collector communicated that these oldest contributions were among the most valued, not because they were more emotionally complex. The complexity came with time and language and the accumulation of inner life, but because they were somehow more direct, more essential, the closest thing in the archive to the pure emotional signal that human dreaming generated at its most fundamental level. Mara thought about those people, the humans who had lived before agriculture, before writing, before any of the technologies of civilization that had become so naturalized she could barely imagine their absence, sleeping in groups, around fires, in the cold and the dark, dreaming as humans had always dreamed, their sleeping minds generating the particular kind of experience that sleeping minds generate, feeling in the dark things that had no waking equivalent. They had been afraid, she knew. Human life at that time was genuinely precarious, exposed to dangers that modern life had made abstract: the cold, the predators, the uncertainty of food, the constant proximity of death. And all of that fear, all of that precariousness, had shown up in their dreams, but so had other things. The archive contained, from those earliest contributions, evidence of something she found deeply moving when she understood it. Those people, in the most dangerous and uncertain of circumstances, had also dreamed of beauty. The collector showed her something briefly, a glimpse into the archive's earlier strata, and she perceived it the way she perceived everything in this state. Partially, incompletely, but enough. The dreams of people sitting around fires in the dark had included the impossible, the flight, the transformation, the presence of something vast and benevolent that she recognized, without any need for interpretation, as an early version of what later generations would formalize into religion. The sense, generated in the sleeping mind of a person who had no words for it, that there was something more, that the world was larger than what waking life revealed, that the night held something other than danger. The capacity for wonder. It had been there from the beginning. The capacity to dream not just fears but possibilities, not just representations of the world as it was, but visions of the world as it could be, or as it was in some other register, some deeper layer beneath the one that daily life operated on. This was, the collector communicated, the original contribution, the first thing that had made Earth worth travelling for. Not the sophisticated emotional complexity that came later. Not the elaborate self-reflective interiority that developed with language and culture and time. The original thing was simpler, and in some ways more profound. The capacity to generate wonder in the dark, to dream beauty when the waking world offered primarily survival, to produce from the sleeping mind experiences of expansion and transcendence that had no waking equivalent and no survival function and no obvious explanation. To dream, simply, the more. This had been the signal that drew the collectors. This had been what they had crossed the distances for, and in the tens of thousands of years since that first signal, the capacity had developed and deepened and ramified into all the extraordinary complexity of modern human dreaming, all the rich and contradictory and nuanced and various contributions that the archive now contained. But at the root of all of it, at the earliest layer of the archive's oldest strata, was that original thing, a sleeping human, long ago, in the cold and the dark, dreaming wonder, dreaming more, contributing without any knowledge of contributing to something they could not have imagined, just as everyone was doing in this city tonight, just as you are doing, dear listener, right now, dreaming the more. There is a moment sometimes just before sleep arrives when the conscious mind has a last clear perception, a final moment of genuine wakefulness, already softening at the edges, already beginning to dissolve into the dream state that waits just below. In this moment, you sometimes see something, not with your eyes, with whatever the mind uses when the eyes close and the imagery of dreams begins to assemble itself, the first shapes and colours, the first fragments of scene that do not yet cohere into narrative, but are already more vivid than memory, already more present than thought, in this moment, in the in-between. Everything that this story has told you tonight lives here. The night garden is real, though the word real needs to be held lightly when applied to things that exist at the edges of ordinary experience. It is as real as anything that happens in the dreaming mind, which is to say, it is real in the way that matters, real in terms of its effect, real in terms of what it generates, and what it gives, and what it leaves behind. The collectors are real in the same way. Whatever they are in the most literal, physical, measurable sense, whatever truth underlies the form in which this story has chosen to present them. The relationship they represent is real. The relationship between the sleeping mind and something larger than the sleeping mind. The relationship between what you generate in your private and unguarded hours and what the world does with what you generate. You are not sleeping alone. You have never been sleeping alone. Your dreams have never been only yours. This is not a loss of privacy. It is not a violation. It is the opposite. It is the acknowledgement that the most intimate and honest and unguarded thing you do, the dreaming, is also the most generous. That what you cannot help giving, what you release each night in the dissolution of consciousness, is received, is valued, is kept. You will dream tonight. You are already beginning to. You can feel it perhaps at the edges of awareness, the softening, the loosening, the sense of the world gently releasing its grip on you, or you releasing your grip on it, which amounts to the same thing. Let it come. Let the threshold approach. Let the hypnagogic slide carry you down into the dreaming state, wherever it takes you, whatever it generates in you, whatever colour and quality of emotional experience your particular sleeping mind produces on this particular night. It will be collected. It will be kept. Not because it is extraordinary, not because you have done anything special to earn the collection, but because it is yours, because it is honest, because it comes from the undefended place where you are most fully what you are, and that, it appears, is exactly what the universe has been waiting for. All this time, every night, patient as the stars, ready to receive whatever you dream. Dream well, dear listener, the night garden is waiting, and so, in the patient dark, are they? There is a particular quality to the city at 3 a.m. Those who sleep do not know it. Those who are awake in it do, but often do not remark on it, because it is simply the background of their wakefulness, the environment in which they are working or worrying or drinking or sitting in the particular silence of being awake when almost everyone else is not. Mara had known it for 11 years. She had stood at her window in the 3 a.m. city more times than she could count, the blackout curtains pulled back, the room dark behind her, looking out at a city that was reduced to its essentials. No traffic, no pedestrians except the occasional person moving with the particular purposefulness of someone who had somewhere to be at this hour, or the particular aimlessness of someone who had nowhere. The streetlights standing in their pools, the buildings dark behind their windows, or mostly dark here and there a lit window. Another insomniac or someone working late, or the blue glow of a screen. She had found it beautiful in its way. The 3 a.m. city was a city with its performance turned off, a city being itself without an audience, a city doing what it did when no one was watching, which was not much, which was rest, which was its own kind of honest. She had also found it lonely. The 3 a.m. loneliness was its own particular variety. Not the loneliness of being in a crowd and feeling separate. Not the loneliness of being in a relationship that had gone wrong and feeling the distance. The 3 a.m. loneliness was the loneliness of being the only consciousness in a world that had turned off its consciousness, being awake in a sleeping world, being present while everyone else was absent. She had not known, in all those 3 a.m. standings at the window, that the world was not as absent as it appeared, that behind every dark window, behind every closed eye in every bedroom in every sleeping building in the sleeping city, something was happening. Something was being generated. Something was being, by the patient and careful being she had just encountered, received. The city at 3 a.m. looked empty. It was in fact full, fuller than at any other hour. More present in some sense, more alive in some of its dimensions, than during the busy daytime hours when the performance of waking life covered over the other thing, the deeper thing, the dreaming. She would not be able to stand at the window again at 3 in the morning and feel as alone as she had felt. She would know. The buildings were full of dreaming. The dark windows were not absences but presences, each one a mind producing something extraordinary without any awareness of doing so. The collectors were moving through it. The night garden was in full bloom, and she was, for once, not excluded from it, not stranded on the surface while the depth remained below, not a researcher watching a phenomenon she couldn't access. She was inside it. She was part of it. She was both observer and observed, both witness and witnessed, both the one who knew and the thing that was known. This was new. She turned from the window she was imagining and faced the interior of the night, and she felt with a completeness she had not felt in years that she was where she was supposed to be, at the threshold, where she had always been, but now, finally knowing it. In the months that followed that October night, Mara's research changed in ways that were visible to her and invisible to everyone else. The experiments remained the same, the methodology remained the same, the rigour and the care and the commitment to evidence remained exactly as they had always been. She was not a person who abandoned the standards she had built a career on, and she had no desire to. The scientific method was not the problem. It had never been the problem. What changed was the quality of her attention. When she sat across from a research subject in the debriefing session after a night in the sleep lab, asking them what they remembered, she listened differently. She listened to the specific words they chose. She listened to what they couldn't find words for, the moments of hesitation and the trailing sentences and the gestures that tried to indicate something the words weren't reaching. She listened to what the dream had felt like, not just what it had contained. She started asking different questions, not in the lab sessions where the protocol was the protocol and she had no intention of deviating from it without good reason. But in the optional follow-up conversations she began offering, the ones she explained as qualitative supplements to the quantitative data, which was true. She asked her subjects, those who were willing, to describe not the images or the narrative of what they remembered dreaming, but the quality of the experience, its texture, its temperature, what it had left behind. The answers surprised her, not because they were unexpected exactly. She had suspected that asking these questions would yield interesting material. What surprised her was how readily people answered, how much they had to say, once invited to say it, about the feeling quality of their dreams, how many of them had been carrying this material, these descriptions of their interior experience in sleep, with nowhere to take it, no context that welcomed it, no professional or social occasion that felt appropriate for sharing the inner texture of their most private hours. They had been waiting to be asked. She wrote, in her private notebook, about this, about how much people held that they had no venue for, about how much of the inner life, not just the dreaming inner life, but the full range of interior experience, went unshared, not because people didn't want to share it, but because the available occasions for sharing were so narrow. The professional context demanded objectivity. The social context demanded brevity. The intimate context required trust that was hard to build and easy to lose. The interior life had more content than the exterior life had room for. She thought about what the collectors were doing in this context. Receiving, night after night, the portions of the interior life that even the most intimate relationships didn't access. The dreams that were never described to anyone. The feelings that never found words. The experiences that happened and then dissolved and left only a residue. A subtle shift in the morning's emotional weather, and were otherwise never known by anyone. The archive contained all of it. The archive was, in some sense, the venue that the interior life had been waiting for, the context that welcomed it all, the occasion that had no constraint on what was appropriate to share, the repository that accepted everything, the beautiful and the frightened and the contradictory and the incoherent and the brief and the elaborate and the simple and the strange. All of it kept. She found this, the longer she held it, to be one of the most comforting things she had ever understood. Not because it required anything of her, not because it changed anything about what she did or didn't do, but because it placed the unwitnessed interior life inside a larger witnessing, because it meant that nothing that happened inside a sleeping mind was simply lost. Not a grief that had no mourners, not a love that had no language, not a wonder that had no mirror, all of it witnessed, All of it, kept, by patient beings who had been doing this for as long as humans had been dreaming. She sat with this understanding for a long time. She let it be what it was, which was something larger and quieter and more sustaining than most of what she had managed to believe in over the course of her long and careful and sometimes lonely professional life. She believed in evidence. She had been given some. And now, dear listener, a word to you directly. You have been travelling with this story through the night. You have followed Mara into the threshold space, into the night garden. Through the understanding that came to her in her reading chair in the amber October dark. You have heard what the collectors told her, not in words, but in the wordless transmission of essential knowing. You have followed her back out into the morning, into the maple tree light, into the changed quality of her ordinary days. You're now at the place where the story gives way, not ends. Stories like this don't end so much as they open into the thing they have been pointing toward. And this story has been pointing all along toward the place where you are now, the threshold. You can feel it probably in the weight of your body, the way the surface beneath you has become more present, more real, as if the world has been quietly consolidating itself around you while you listened. The way your thoughts have softened, the edges less sharp, the connections between ideas more associative, more loosely linked, more like the thinking of the hypnagogic state than the thinking of full waking consciousness. You're at the edge. The night garden is below you, above you, around you, in the space behind your closed eyes where the images are just beginning to form, the first fragmentary shapes of the dreaming that is already underway, already generating itself in your particular mind with its particular history and its particular quality of inner weather. You do not need to do anything. You do not need to produce anything worthy. You do not need to dream correctly, whatever that might mean. There is no correctly. There is only the dream that comes, which is always the right dream, which is always exactly what your sleeping mind needed to make on this particular night. The collectors will come, as they always come. They will move through the space of your dreaming with their extraordinary care, their reverence, their patient and practiced attention. They will receive what is freely given, which is to say they will receive everything, because the dreaming mind gives everything freely, withholds nothing, produces without agenda and releases without reservation. And what they carry away will be yours, your particular quality of experience, your specific emotional signature, the shade of feeling that only you can produce, that has never been produced in quite this combination before and will never be produced in quite this combination again. It will be woven into the archive, it will join the ongoing argument. And in the morning, when you wake, it will be gone from your memory in the way that dreams are almost always gone, dissolved in the solvent of ordinary consciousness, leaving perhaps a trace, a residue, a slight shift in the morning's emotional temperature. And that will be fine. That will be as it is supposed to be, because the keeping is not yours to do. The keeping has been taken care of, for a very long time, by beings who cross distances you can barely imagine, because what you dream is worth it. Let that be the last thought before the threshold. Let that be what carries you over. You are worth it. Your dreaming is worth it. The universe has always known. Sleep now. The night garden is ready. There is a number Mara thought about later, when she was back at her desk in the laboratory. Surrounded by her instruments and her data, and the familiar comfortable territory of her professional life. The number was approximately 8 billion. This was, in the general range, the number of people alive on Earth at this moment in time. And of those 8 billion people, a substantial portion, varying by time zone, were sleeping at any given hour. The sleeping world rotated around the planet the way the dark itself rotated, following the sun's absence, a great wave of unconsciousness moving westward around the globe as the Earth turned. At any given moment, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of all living humans were asleep. In absolute terms, somewhere between 2.5 and 4 billion sleeping minds, 2.5 to 4 billion dreaming minds. She had known these numbers. They were not new information. She had cited them in papers, had used them to illustrate the scope of the phenomenon she studied, had noted with professional interest that sleep was among the most widespread of all behaviours in the animal kingdom, almost universal among complex life, representing an enormous investment of biological time across the living world. But she had not, until now, understood what those numbers meant in terms of what was happening in the night garden at any given moment. 2.5 to 4 billion dreaming minds, each one producing its particular emotional experience, its specific quality of feeling made form, its individual contribution to the archive. The collectors were extraordinarily busy. She understood, thinking about this, something that she had not fully grasped during the night itself. The collectors were not a small group of beings visiting occasionally, sampling here and there, gathering a representative selection. The work was far more comprehensive than that. The archive was being built from something like the full range of human dreaming, from as many of the sleeping minds as could be reached, which, it appeared, was most of them. The collectors worked in the way that large things work when they have been doing their job for a very long time, with efficiency that looked like ease, with the smooth coordination of a process that had been refined over millennia. What had appeared to her, in her partial perception in the night garden, as individual beings moving through the space of a single sleeping city was, she now understood, only what was visible from where she stood. The actual scope of the work was planetary, a coordinated, continuous planetary operation that had been running, with the kind of consistency and reliability that only things operating outside the constraints of human time can achieve, for the full duration of complex human dreaming. This was, even by the standards of what she had learned that night, an extraordinary thing to hold in the mind. She tried to picture it, the spinning earth, the great wave of sleep moving around it, the particular thickness and richness of the dreaming at any given longitude as the deep night reached its fullest and most productive hours. And the collectors, moving through it all, receiving and carrying and returning, the night garden yielding its nightly harvest to beings who had never, in all of human history, stopped coming. Not for a single night, not in all the centuries, not through the historical disasters, the plagues, the wars, the collapses of civilizations, not through any of the human catastrophes that had periodically reduced the number of sleeping minds. Not through any of the changes in human life that had altered the character of the dreaming, the way that industrialization had changed sleep patterns or artificial light, or the particular anxieties of particular historical periods that showed up in the dreams of entire populations, through all of it, every night, consistent as gravity. The regularity of it was, she found, one of the most moving aspects of the whole thing. The sheer persistence of the collection, the commitment of it, the implied valuing sustained across such enormous timescales of what the sleeping human world produced. She thought about how humans valued things, how the value of something was often demonstrated by what was done to preserve it, or to be near it, or to ensure its continuation. A thing that someone travelled for, repeatedly, across great distances, without any apparent fatigue or diminishment of motivation, must be valuable in a way that went beyond utility. It must be valued for itself. The collectors valued human dreaming for itself, not instrumentally, not as a means to some other end, though the archive was building towards something, but genuinely, intrinsically, for the thing it was. Dreaming minds were, to them, valuable in the way that beautiful things are valuable, not because of what they can be exchanged for, not because of what they produce beyond themselves, but because of what they are in themselves, which is a thing of a particular quality that cannot be replicated or substituted. She had spent her career studying sleep. She had always known, at some level below the explicit, that what she was studying was important. She had not known how far the importance extended, not until the collectors showed her, not until the October evening when she had stopped under a maple tree and looked up. And so, dear listener, we come to the place where the story becomes something else. You have been drifting, perhaps, for some time now. The words have been reaching you from a greater and greater distance, the way sound travels across water, softened by the medium it moves through, arriving at your ears still recognizable, but somehow different from how it began. This is right. This is where the story has been carrying you, toward this softening, toward this distance. Your body is heavy. You may not be entirely sure at this moment whether you are awake or asleep. This is the threshold. This is the hypnagogic state, the place that Mara inhabited for 11 years, the place that the collectors recognized as a particular kind of gift. You are here too. Let it deepen. Let the heaviness of your body increase, the way sand settles at the bottom of a glass when the water stills. Slowly, completely, without effort. Your legs are heavy. Your arms are heavy. Your hands, wherever they are resting, have their own particular weight, pressing gently against whatever surface holds them. Let that weight be information. Let it tell you that you are safe, that you are held, that the surface beneath you is reliable, that it will continue to hold you whether you are conscious of it or not, whether you are awake or asleep, whether you remember this moment or it dissolves in the way that all moments eventually dissolve. The surface will hold you, the night will hold you, the night garden is receiving you. Think now of a place you love, not a complicated place, not a place associated with obligation or effort, a simple place, a place where you have felt the particular ease of being somewhere that fits, a beach, a room, a garden, a hillside, a stretch of familiar street, a kitchen in a house you no longer live in. Whatever place, when you bring it to mind, brings with it a quality of ease. Let that place arrive now, in whatever form it comes. Don't force the imagery. Just allow it. Just give it permission to be there, and it will come, because the sleeping mind is already working, already assembling, already generating from your memories and your feelings the raw materials of tonight's dreaming. The place you love is there. It is waiting for you to arrive. And in a moment, you will. You will step across the threshold. You will move from the thin, careful consciousness of wakefulness into the full and generative consciousness of dreaming, where you will be, for the next several hours, more fully yourself than you are possible to be in any other state. More honest, more unguarded, more capable of feeling the full range of what you feel, and the collectors will be there. You will not see them. You will not know they are there. This is exactly as it is supposed to be. Their presence is not intrusive, not observable, not in any way a disturbance to the dreaming. They move with too much care for that. They have been practicing this care for too long. They will be there. They will receive what you give. And what you give, simply by dreaming, will join the archive, will become part of the argument, will be woven into something that has been building for longer than human civilization, that will continue building long after any of us can imagine, that is larger and more patient and more purposeful than anything we have managed to construct in the waking world. Your dream tonight, woven in, part of it, part of the whole. Breathe. The threshold is here, and just below it, warm and dark and full of everything you're about to dream, the night garden waits. Go now. Let go. Let yourself fall, gently, into the dreaming. It will catch you. It always does. Good night, dreamer. Good night. There is something the night teaches that the day cannot. The day is full of instruction, full of information arriving from every direction, demanding to be processed, categorized, responded to. The day has a logic that moves forward, one thing leading to the next, the future always pulling at the present, making it difficult to be fully in any given moment because the next moment is already making demands. The night is different. The night suspends forward motion. In the night, and especially in the deepest part of the night, in the dreaming hours, there is only now. The dreaming mind is not planning. It is not anticipating. It is not managing the future. It is simply experiencing what arises fully, in the moment of its arising, with the complete presence that only the absence of the self-conscious, future-planning mind makes possible. This is why dreams feel so real when you are inside them, not because they are more vivid than waking experience, though often they are, but because they are more present, more immediate, more completely happening. The dreaming mind is not elsewhere. It is here, entirely in the moment of the dream, in a way that the waking mind, with its constant divided attention between the present and the anticipated, rarely achieves. This is one of the things the collectors value most, the full presence, the complete nowness of the dream experience. There is no other state in which human consciousness is so entirely where it is. Not meditation, though meditation reaches for this. Not flow states, though flow states approach it. Not even the most absorbing creative work, though creative work at its best moves in this direction. Only dreaming achieves it fully. Only the sleeping mind, released from the tyranny of the self-conscious, achieves the complete, unequivocal presence of now. And from that presence, from that complete nowness, the most genuine and valuable of all the archive's contributions arise. The feeling that is not about anything past or future. The experience that is not in relation to any other experience, not comparative, not evaluative, not positioned within a narrative of the self. Just this. Just the dream, just the feeling complete and unqualified and entirely present. Mara thought about this for a long time. She thought about how much of her waking life she spent somewhere other than where she was. How even in the moment she most wanted to be present, the mind pulled toward the before and the after, the already done and the not yet happened. The things she wished had been different and the things she hoped might be different in the future. She thought about how dreaming, which she had spent 11 years failing to reach properly, was actually the only state she knew of in which this constant divided attention stopped, in which the mind was simply in itself, not wishing to be elsewhere, not reaching for what was not there. Just here, in the full dimensionality of the now, generating from its depth the particular quality of experience that only it could generate. She had been trying for 11 years to get to sleep, and sleep, it appeared, had been trying for 11 years to get to her, carrying her forward night after night into the threshold state where she lived, waiting for her to understand what that state was, waiting for her to look up. She had looked up, and the night had met her where she was. This, she thought, might be the most important thing, that you do not have to achieve some other state to be valuable to the night. You do not have to sleep deeply, or dream vividly, or remember your dreams, or practice any particular technique, or hold any particular belief. You only have to be what you are, in the state that you're in, with whatever quality of sleep your nervous system makes available on any given night. The collectors receive all of it. The deep dreams and the surface dreams and the threshold dreams and the in-between dreams. All of it, part of the archive. All of it, part of the argument. All of it, valued. You are already contributing. You already have been. You will tonight. And knowing this, or not knowing it, changes nothing about the contribution and everything about how you carry the night. So carry it gently, dear listener. Carry it with the knowledge that the dark is not empty, that the sleep is not absence, that you, in your particular and irreplaceable quality of dreaming experience, are part of something vast that has been building since before recorded history and will continue building past anything either of us can see from here. You're dreaming into an archive. You're contributing to an argument. You are, in your most unguarded and honest hours, giving the universe something it travelled for, and it is grateful. In whatever way something larger than human gratitude can be grateful, it is grateful. And so, finally, are you. Grateful for the night, grateful for the dream, grateful perhaps for the first time for whatever form your sleep takes, easy or difficult, vivid or thin, remembered or lost on waking. It is all received. All of it, every night. Sleep now, dear listener. The archive is waiting, the night garden is in bloom, and somewhere in the patient dark the collectors are moving with their extraordinary care, ready to receive whatever you dream. Give them something beautiful, or something strange, or something frightened, or something full of love, or something that has no name yet. Give them whatever arises. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. Good night.